It had happened again. Some absolute schmuck of a junior researcher had left a certain door ajar. The door that kept SCP-049 the Plague Doctor locked in his containment chamber. As a result, the good doctor had wandered out and given the junior researcher a hug of appreciation for freeing him, leaving his dead body sprawled out across the ground. Typical, a problem solving itself. But this time, the problem had been a little more severe than just the one responsible facing immediate consequences of their actions. The Plague Doctor had grabbed the junior researcher's corpse and dragged him back into his cell, leaving the door once again slightly ajar. With a variety of equipment from his magical medical bag, the doctor had transformed the junior researcher's corpse into a disfigured zombie, in hopes of curing him of the Pestilence, and released him into the facility. 049 had followed him out to observe his behavior, and in the process he'd given several guards and members of janitorial staff a congratulatory hand touch, sending them to early graves. By the time people realized what was going on, 6 people were dead, several zombies were wandering around the building, and 049 was spotted in a lab stealing medical equipment. Dr. Clef, who was on duty at the time, was getting sick of this nonsense. This was actually the 3rd breach that the Plague Doctor had been involved in this month, and it was only the 14th. He was frankly ready to wash his hands of this particular anomaly, because it wasn't just the fact that the Plague Doctor killed people that bothered Dr. Clef. After all, Dr. Clef himself had killed a considerable number of people. It was the fact that the Plague Doctor was also so damn sanctimonious about it. Clef breathed a sigh and rubbed his temples to subdue the incoming headache. It was time to have a little tribunal and decide what disciplinary action he would take against this freaky physician. The Plague Doctor was on his knees, locked into place by heavy chains and restraints around his neck, arms, and legs. These weren't even official Foundation property. Dr. Clef had brought them in from his private leisure room back at his house. Oof. As usual, the doctor was preaching the immense value of his work.
"The pestilence runs rife, Dr. Clef. Surely you must see that,"
the doctor cried.
"You're a man of science yourself, allegedly. Surely you can empathize with my mission. I just want to help people. Can't you see? I'm just like you."
Blah, blah, blah. Always this goddamn pestilence. Do you ever turn off? Clef said, waving away the doctor's words. I don't know about your pestilence, but I'm definitely looking at a pest right now. What the hell am I supposed to do with you? No matter what allowances we give you, you just keep escaping. The doctor hung his head. He hated when people treated him like this, like some wild animal. Of course, occasionally people died, but it was only in the pursuit of saving so many more lives. He tried to convince Dr. Clef that the costs would pale in the face of the rewards, but the gung-ho Foundation researcher simply wasn't interested in hearing it. Instead, he was brewing up a new idea, one that might rid him of the Plague Doctor forever, even without breaking the Foundation's goofy rule against killing anomalies. You know what? Dr. Clef said, affecting a voice of mock kindness. You finally got your words through my thick head. I get it now. I get how important your research is. All this time we've been stepping in the way of Nobel Prize-winning work. I don't know how I'll ever live with myself for this. I just want to say personally on behalf of the SCP Foundation, we are truly sorry. Suddenly, the Plague Doctor perked up. My goodness, he thought. I've finally gotten through. He was practically vibrating with glee.
"Your apology is accepted, good sir,"
the Plague Doctor proclaimed.
"Let us not obsess over the past. We will look towards the future."
Exactly, Dr. Clef cut in. That's why, by way of an apology, I plan to reassign you to a special research facility where you get to run the show. You'll have live test subjects aplenty and no accountability to the Foundation whatsoever. How does that sound to you, Doc? The Plague Doctor somehow rose to his feet despite the chains, perhaps propelled by the sheer force of his love for science.
"I suggest we leave at once,"
he said.
"Thank you, Dr. Clef, you kind man. I always knew that you were the reasonable one."
Even Dr. Clef had to resist the urge to laugh about that one. Smash cut to the next day, when Dr. Clef, the Plague Doctor, and a group of mobile task force officers were crowded into a helicopter heading towards SCP-3008, also known as the Infinite Ikea. Of course, the Plague Doctor didn't know that. He thought he was heading towards the state-of-the-art research facility that Dr. Clef promised him. Clef, on the inside, reasoned that what this bird-brained moron didn't know wouldn't hurt him. The helicopter landed within the perimeter established around the abandoned Ikea, and the Plague Doctor was herded off the vehicle. He'd bought Clef's lie hook, line, and sinker, and as such was unusually cooperative with the guards. Dr. Clef pointed to the building and instructed the plague doctor to head inside and just keep walking. He'd find the test subjects and the facilities soon enough. And why would the Foundation be lying to him? They'd even let him take his medical bag in there. When you get in there, ask for Hugh. He'll be your lead assistant, Dr. Clef told him.
Lead assistant? You mean to tell me I will have multiple research assistants?
The plague doctor said.
Oh, splendid. I cannot wait to meet this Hugh.
Oh yeah, Dr. Clef said, biting his bottom lip to stifle a laugh. His name's Jas. Be sure to mention that. It'll help speed along the process. The plague doctor nodded his head in thanks.
Much appreciated, Dr. Clef. Rest assured I will not forget this kindness.
As the plague doctor wandered into the abandoned store, his heart swelling with pride, Dr. Clef began to quietly laugh behind his back like the big old jerkface he was. When he could no longer see the plague doctor, Clef turned to one of his colleagues and jokingly asked, "Does that mean we'll need to reclassify 3008 as Thaumiel now? Not looking forward to that paperwork." On the inside of the infinite Ikea, the plague doctor was chuckling to himself with glee. After all these years of hard work, his merit had been recognized, and he'd been given the respect he deserved from his peers at the Foundation. He was so wrapped up in his own sense of personal pride that he didn't even register it as strange that he was surrounded by odd, sterile living rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, and kitchens, all in a seemingly random configuration, with signs next to them in a mix of the King's English and what he believed to be some form of Swedish that he didn't quite understand. Still, he didn't mind too much. He just assumed that these must be the accommodations for himself, his patients, his test subjects, and his research assistants, and to think they'd built this whole place just for him and his research. It lifted his soul to know that the SCP Foundation had finally recognized the pestilence for the danger that it is. From now on, everything would change. He'd probably find the cure in the next few years. Then it suddenly occurred to him he was a little lost. The layout of the research laboratory was incredibly strange. It seemed like an utterly arbitrary configuration of bizarre rooms, separated by wide aisles. It didn't seem sanitary at all. Where were the sealed laboratories, the gurneys, the patient beds, the medical equipment? And on top of all that, where was Hugh? Some kind of shenanigans were afoot. That much was clear now. The plague doctor quickened his pace through the halls of this strange building. One way or another, he would get to the bottom of this. Nothing would get in the way of the important research he planned to conduct here. After what felt like hours of aimless walking, the plague doctor encountered some other sentient beings. A group of 3 people wearing ragged post-apocalyptic looking clothes, all carrying defensive kitchen knives and hammers. The doctor was overjoyed to see these people he could actually converse with. The others, upon seeing him, were a little taken aback. Had some Ren Fair cosplayer somehow accidentally wandered into the building? What on earth was going on here?
Excuse me, good sirs, the plague doctor called out. I'm searching for a Hugh Jas.
That caused the group to break into laughter, immediately lessening the tension. The de facto leader of the group, Calvin, replied, "Aren't we all?" 049 didn't get it. But these humans nonetheless liked the cut of this new guy's jib. All 3 of them had been in here for at least a year each, and it had been a while since they had a good laugh in this terrible labyrinthian place. Calvin stepped forward, lowering his weapons now that he could see that this weird cosplayer guy didn't seem like a threat. He cleared his throat and asked, "Mind if I ask who you are, fella?" The plague doctor was taken aback by this question. Did they not prepare you in advance for my arrival? The group shook their heads. How strange, the plague doctor said. Well, I suppose some proper introductions are in order then. I am your new leader, as appointed by Dr. Clef of the SCP Foundation. I'm a reasonable man, a man of science, and under my leadership, we will be a scientific force the likes of which the world has never seen. Together we will cure the pestilence and save all of mankind. There was a long pause after that. None of the group of humans really knew how to react to this. Calvin thought to himself, great, we got ourselves a major space case. Let's get him back to the camp before he gets himself killed. He forced a smile and nodded, pretending to be impressed by the plague doctor's bizarre ranting. Well then, Doctor, he said, we better get you back to our camp. We're not going to get anything done while we're just standing around, will we? The plague doctor couldn't agree more. He followed the group of his 3 new research assistants further into this incredibly strange scientific building. The plague doctor indeed appreciated Dr. Clef putting all this together for him, but he would privately indulge in the thought that Dr. Clef seemingly could not put together a laboratory to save his life. This place was a bizarre, confusing disaster, but he would still make it work one way or another. However, his musings were interrupted when the lights went out. The three people with him began gasping in shock and horror. Calvin was repeating to himself, "No, this is impossible. I timed it. I swear I timed it." But the Plague Doctor found their attitude to be utterly baffling. These were supposedly to be intrepid men of science, and yet they were afraid of the dark. It seemed they really did need his leadership to get anything done here. "Follow me, gentlemen," the Plague Doctor said. "It's merely a failure of the lights. I'll get this rubbish sorted out." He began to walk forward as the three human beings began to panic behind him, telling him that if he keeps walking, he'll die. He needs to come back. They need to stick together, but he kept walking. He didn't get this far by being a coward after all. At least the others are following him now, wielding their hammers and kitchen knives. He'd whipped them into shape. Then his attention was stolen by something altogether stranger. It was a creature, humanoid but not human, standing about 10 feet away from him, seemingly ignorant to his presence. The Plague Doctor was simultaneously fascinated and horrified by what he saw before him. It was in some kind of yellow and blue uniform, with a hideous, malformed, faceless head and two long, tangled arms that it dragged along the floor behind it like an orangutan. It was a truly repulsive, pitiful creature, one that made the Plague Doctor sad to even look at it. Clearly, this had to be an advanced case of the Pestilence. While the Plague Doctor was filled with scientific curiosity, his three human traveling companions were filled with terror. They were still so far away from the camp, and the staff had found them already? Because there's never just one. They're like big, deadly cockroaches. If you can see one, more are on the way. Their best bet is just staying incredibly quiet and trying to sneak past. "Hello there, you poor fellow," the Plague Doctor said, stepping forwards and waving. "It seems you're in dire need of some medical assistance." Calvin and his two companions were mortified. So this was how they were going to die? After making the mistake of being kind to a clearly deranged man dressed as a medieval Plague Doctor? What a way to go. The second it heard the Plague Doctor's voice, the member of staff was activated, as were several others in a 10-meter radius. They all suddenly stood upright, muscles taut with violence waiting to happen. They began chanting their dreaded phrase, "The store is now closed. Please exit the building," while converging and running towards the Plague Doctor like a pack of hungry dogs. It was a terrifying sight to behold. But not for the Plague Doctor himself. There were so many of these poor infected people, and clearly the pestilence had not only warped their bodies but broken their minds. After all, this wasn't a store. This was the new research center specifically designed for his research. Dr. Clef would surely never just lie about something like that. He was an honorable man. Then again, maybe that was exactly why Clef had sent him here. So many victims of advanced pestilence would make perfect test subjects. A paradise of research. The Plague Doctor couldn't be happier as a group of 10 staff members converged on him. Calvin and his men could barely look. The new guy may have been crazy, but he didn't deserve to go out like this. However, the last thing they expected was for the Plague Doctor to calmly raise his hands, allowing the members of staff to run right into his deadly touch. In the following moments, all 10 of them were lying on the ground, dead. The 3 men were utterly speechless. What had just happened? Had the man in the strange costume snuck in a secret knife or a silenced gun? Had he gone into some hyper-advanced instant-kill kung fu move that was simply too fast and subtle for them to perceive? Or had he really just killed 10 members of staff in mere seconds just by touching them? The Plague Doctor turned to them and said, "Well then, gentlemen, let us not dilly-dally. Grab one each and we'll carry them to the laboratory on the double." Soon after, the Plague Doctor and his 3 research assistants arrived at a nearby encampment. Several other members of staff had attacked them on the way, but a single touch from the Plague Doctor had killed each one. The human's perspective on this mysterious stranger had changed entirely. He'd gone from a goofy crank to a godlike savior. For as long as they'd been in here, they'd lived in terror of staff, but they were nothing to this man. With a single touch from him, they were gone forever. As the doors of the camp were closed behind him, the people of the camp began running towards them, confused and curious. The Plague Doctor was delighted to see that there were so many other research assistants here to help him on his divine mission. Dr. Clef, that beautiful, sweet man, had given him such a boon. Perhaps now, the pestilence may finally be cured. One of the camp leaders ran over furious and yelled, "What the hell are you doing? You know you can't just bring those bodies in here. It'll only attract more of them, you fool." Fool? The Plague Doctor found this rather rude, but he'd overlook it for the sake of the greater good. He'd spent his whole life dealing with the aspirations from lesser intellects who couldn't even begin to understand his work. The masses rarely understand processes, only results. And here he knew he would be able to give them results.
Worry not, good sir. I am a medical man,
The plague doctor said, simply walking past the naysayer and bidding his first 3 research assistants to drag the bodies after him.
I will bring this place up to code. You will see soon enough that my scientific leadership is second to none. Now I will retire to my office and begin dissecting these samples.
Before the camp leader could say anything else, the plague doctor had retired into a staff room, which had been retrofitted as a kind of headquarters for members of the camp. That's when Calvin approached the camp leader and told him the astonishing news.
Look, boss, I know he looks like a goofball in a Halloween costume, he said, but this guy, he's special. He's something else. He can kill the staff.
The camp leader scoffed.
So can we, he said.
Calvin shook his head.
No, you don't get it, boss. Not like us. This guy, he can kill the staff just by touching them.
And the camp leader had no response to that. In his new study, the plague doctor was dissecting one of the dead staff members and was astonished to see what was happening within. The creature had no organs. It was simply that strange, slightly yellow tissue all the way down. He'd never seen the pestilence have such a profound and horrific effect on its victims. It had horribly altered them, all the way to the core. Was this what the Great Dying was truly capable of in its later stages? The plague doctor shuddered, both with horror and scientific excitement. He'd barely been here a day, and he'd made some of the most incredible discoveries. He took fastidious notes on these new revelations, feeling the picture coming together in his mind. His deep scientific thoughts were interrupted by the door opening, and Calvin and the camp leader stepped in. The camp leader was different than before. He had none of the bluster and arrogance of his first words. He showed fealty, like he was standing in the presence of a divine being.
I'd like to formally welcome you to our camp, Doctor,
the camp leader said. We're extremely fortunate to have you here. Please, if you need anything, don't hesitate to let us know. We are truly at your service. The plague doctor was delighted to hear this. With a polite nod, he replied,
More test subjects like these will do just fine, good sir. I believe I am very close to a breakthrough here.
Oh, here we go again. It's time for us to take another crack at putting SCP-682 6 feet under once and for all. If you've been following this channel for any amount of time, then there's one thing you know for certain. SCP-682 is harder to kill than pretty much, well, anything. We've made multiple videos on the Foundation's failed attempts to finally terminate the beast, and we've made a video with some of your ideas on how to finally slay the monster. And considering you're watching this video right now, you can probably guess how that went. Now it's time for one more run at the Death Star, and once again it's with your ideas from comments and community post responses. Let's see if any of them can help us finally put this ill-tempered reptile to rest. If we can't, well, we're not blaming you, but it's also your fault. Let the community termination attempts commence. Anas McBride suggested, Ask the Witch Child. SCP-239, also known as the Witch Child, is one of the most dangerous and powerful anomalies out there. She's a small girl with unparalleled reality-warping mental abilities, so powerful that her very brainwaves alone can be passively fatal. However, the problem is, her power is so potentially dangerous that she's forever kept in a kind of medically induced anomalous coma. Dr. Alto Cleth thinks she's so dangerous he's even campaigning to have her terminated. As a result, the O5 Council has forbidden any cross-testing between 682 and 239, fearing the consequence of 682 gaining 239's powers and becoming a truly unstoppable threat capable of causing an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Syed Zamin Ali Shah Kazimi Mushadi suggested, kill him with SCP-734. This is an interesting one. SCP-734, also known as the Baby, is an anomaly that causes a painful degenerative disease that eventually disintegrates the entire body and kills the victim if they so much as come into contact with the baby or its fluids. However, based on cross-tests with other similar touch-it-and-die anomalies like SCP-409, the Contagious Crystal, we can probably guess how exactly this would go down. In all likelihood, the baby's anomalous effects would infect and destroy large portions of SCP-682's body. However, at this point, 682 would adapt to the threat and begin to reverse it and heal. Even worse, it's likely that 682 would steal the ability for a limited time and become deadly to the touch. Caden Griffin suggested, why don't you use the Dragon Slayer to terminate 682? It has proved itself many times in fights with LSAs. SCP-5514 The Dragon Slayer is essentially a giant fighting robot designed to take down killer kaijus with its plethora of state-of-the-art anomalous weapons and defenses. However, we'd still argue that while it could definitely help in immobilizing 682 during a rampage, it doesn't have much of a chance of actually killing it. Let's look at SCP-001 The Gate Guardian, a supernatural warrior with a blade hotter than the sun, capable of cleaving atoms in half. Even he couldn't kill SCP-682. So, robotic approximation with only a fraction of the Gate Guardian's power is probably not going to have any real chance of killing 682. I'm a Chuckster 48 suggested, make it bite its tongue so hard that it just destroys itself. While we can certainly attest from personal experience that this really hurts, we worry that if ever 682 bit its own tongue really hard, it'd just drive it into a state of murderous rage. Though we do take a small piece of satisfaction in knowing its tongue would probably be in distress for a few minutes afterwards, it's unlikely to wipe out the beast once and for all. Lazy Royce suggested, how about we just put SCP-682 in 2317's cell? SCP-2317 is an old wooden door that functions as a portal into the domain of the planet-destroying monster known as the Devourer of Worlds, a being that many believe is associated with the Scarlet King, and will inevitably escape and cause an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. While you may be thinking, perhaps it'll kill 682, it's more likely that it'll collaborate, seeing as they both want the same thing, namely, to kill everyone. If you let 682 in, chances are it'll come back through the door with the Devourer right on its tail. Then, it's all of our problems. Guest 123116 suggested, drop him in Russia so they can terminate him. The Foundation has technically already tried this. They dropped 682 into SCP-3930, a patch of literal non-existence in Russia that causes anything that goes inside of it to cease to exist. And afterwards, he was fine. So yeah, dropping him anywhere in Russia is probably just going to get a bunch of innocent Russian civilians killed. Meisher said, the Foundation shouldn't worry about how to kill him, but how to stop his ability to adapt. I would suggest typing SCP-682 no adaptability juice or something like that into SCP-294 and then kill him by any means, which should kill him forever. An interesting theory, but what if he simply adapts to SCP-682 no adaptability juice? Then we'd really all be in trouble. Mario TGP said, give him a Twitter account, he'll be cancelled instantly for his spicy opinions. SCP-682 would cancel Twitter itself for not having opinions that are spicy enough. Sorry, Jack. SCP-096, still sore about losing the battle, we assume, said, let him fight the Queen of England. After all, she's immortal too. We definitely think it would be interesting to see SCP-682 go head-to-head with the Queen of England. Based on all the knighting she does, we know that she at least has a sword, though we don't know if that sword is as powerful as the one wielded by the Gate Guardian. But regardless of the outcome, the battle would definitely change history. Every history book would simply read, SCP-682 punched the Queen. Everything else would just be a footnote. Noah Cordero said, use SCP-2935 to kill the lizard. As you can see in the video, he will die. SCP-2935, also known as O-Death, is probably one of the scariest and deadliest SCPs out there. It killed an entire alternate dimension, including an alternate SCP-682. The problem is, putting our 682 into 2935's alternate reality could lead to the destruction of our entire dimension. Why is that? Because if 682 was somehow able to return to our world from the world of 2935, it could bring the spirit of death itself back with it, and kill us all in the process. Explorando con Beto 1 suggested, SCP-682 vs. Lady Dimitrescu. While Resident Evil 8's Lady Dimitrescu has certainly captured all of our hearts, we don't think she'll be bringing home the W on this one. Lady Dimitrescu has a powerful adaptive ability of her own, with a high resistance to damage, impressive regenerative abilities, and a number of offensive capabilities, from huge claws to a powerful dragon form. However, considering she wasn't able to defeat Ethan Winters, she probably wouldn't be able to defeat SCP-682 either. However, in her dragon form, SCP-682 may finally join the rest of us in developing a crush. Or is that being crushed? Anyway, moving on. Jonathan Pecanese suggested, just ask SCP-343 on how to destroy it, or even better, ask if he could destroy it. It's an idea so good that the Foundation actually tried it, and it went about as well as you can expect. When the SCP known as God entered the containment chamber, he couldn't even see 682 in there, as though the creature was somehow totally invisible to him. When God eventually got bored and left, they told him that he was in there to destroy 682. He simply replied, "He's not one of mine, deal with him yourself." Interpret that how you will. 12 Escobar Blancas Eddie Sol suggested they could send him to Area 37 for the Sisters to experiment with. SCP-1765 The Sisters are a trio of terrifyingly powerful reality warpers that have taken over Area 37 and spend their days tormenting everyone inside with their twisted experiments. Using them to try to terminate 682 leads to similar problems with using the Witch Child or the Devourer of Worlds. If they decide to team up rather than fighting, or the Sisters take over 682, we'd all be effectively doomed. Kiroya suggested, would the ants from SCP-743 tear 682 apart? The Foundation actually tried this, getting 682 to consume chocolate from the SCP-743 fountain, incurring the wrath of its flesh-eating ants. However, 682 developed an adaptation that gave it a long, anteater-like tongue that it then used to consume the ants faster than they could consume it. And even worse, the chocolate seemed to enhance its regenerative abilities even more for several days afterwards. Ball2222 suggested, write the name in the death note. Great idea! We'll put it into practice as soon as you can tell us SCP-682's real name. It may come as a surprise, but its parents didn't actually name it the hard-to-destroy reptile. Stephen Vieri suggested, I thought that maybe we should put him in a giant blender, and then when he's in small pieces, put lava in the blender, so we'll incinerate him, then put nuclear waste into the blender and repeat that until there's no more left of him. After the cooking whisks last time, we feel obliged to include at least one attempt to kill SCP-682 with oversized kitchen equipment in every video about him. However, this attempt would probably go about as well as the last one, we're afraid. Extreme physical trauma by conventional means, like burning and dismemberment, has never been successful in the past, and the Foundation is extremely hesitant to use anything radioactive on the beast, in case it adapts and adds deadly radiation to its own arsenal. Mr. Master IQ suggested, just take away his plot armor. You can pry SCP-682's plot armor from its cold, dead claws, and as we've already learned, making those claws cold and dead seems next to impossible. Moving on. JC3 suggested, if anyone can't beat the Undying Lizard, why not Omni-Man? I mean, he did kill all the Guardians of the Globe, of course he can kill SCP-682. Omni-Man from the comic and TV series Invincible is undeniably a formidable opponent, given he's able to destroy superhero teams, cities, and even planets. However, one of the few enemies to give Omni-Man a genuine run for his money is a genetically enhanced kaiju known as Hail Mary. Given that first, 682 has taken on beings stronger than Omni-Man, like the Gate Guardian, and lived, and second that Omni-Man has struggled with monsters before, chances are he probably couldn't permanently kill this one either. Heikani Havea suggested, kill SCP-053, then 682 will be sad and die. Wow, now that's cold-blooded. However, even if this did work, it's important for you to remember that it's impossible to actually kill SCP-053, also known as the Child or the Little Girl. Part of her anomalous abilities is that anyone who attempts to kill her will themselves immediately die during the process, normally due to a heart attack. So this method would result in a pile of dead Foundation personnel and no progress. Jerry Zhang said, mush peanut butter on it. This would definitely work if 682 had some kind of severe peanut allergy. After all, anaphylactic shock is no laughing matter. However, in the far more likely event that this will have no effect on SCP-682, you will likely just die with your hands covered in peanut butter. Andrew Mills suggested, my idea? Have several xenomorphs, predators, and Daleks, yes, that's a Doctor Who reference, take 682 on. Once again, in all likelihood, this would have no effect. 682 has survived blades and lasers, the primary weapons of the Predators and Daleks, and spends the majority of its life immersed in powerful acid, so the xenomorph would hold no surprises for it. Sadly, this three-way team-up would be no match for 682. And even if it did defeat him, whoever wins, well, you know how it goes. Mateo Huang suggested, maybe just destroy reality. This might be the thing that finally kills SCP-682. But considering it's already survived being thrown into pure nothingness in Russia, it may just result in it being one of the only survivors of a full destruction of reality. We, on the other hand, would all be killed, though in a sense we wouldn't have to deal with SCP-682 anymore. So maybe that's a type of winning? And finally, Blind Honor suggested, would Saitama be a good way to eliminate it? He is One Punch Man after all. Of anyone we've covered in this series, Saitama from One Punch Man would probably be the most likely to kill SCP-682, especially if he was taking the battle seriously. After all, he has killed planet-destroying monsters before with barely any effort. The only real question is whether he could be bothered to come down to a Foundation containment site and fight it. Saitama hasn't been known to be a very motivated guy. But of course, like with anything, there's the risk that 682 would survive and gain his powers, which would be bad. Awesome, but bad. Over 50 men and women, clad in red robes, kneel before an unholy altar. They chant and mutter indecipherable words, words of cruelty and madness, of obsession and sacrilege. Not long ago, these were regular people. Computer technicians, teachers, plumbers, construction workers, accountants. This was before they fell under the ungodly influence of a new ruler. The center of this makeshift place of worship was once a normal school gymnasium, but it's now the home of a huge statue. A humanoid being, wreathed in tentacles. Its head is more like a squid or cuttlefish than anything resembling an actual human face. While he's known to the cultists as the Tentacled God, the beast they worship is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-2662, and he sits in the belly of one of their expansive containment facilities, locked away from the world. But not for long, if his devoted followers have anything to say about it. This is their God, all-powerful and unchanging, and when it comes to springing him from containment, no tactic is too vile or underhanded to get the job done. Their mortal leader and high priest, a man in a purple robe calling himself Brother Marsh, walks among their crouched forms. He whispers instructions for the great day of liberation that's soon to come, providing everyone plays their part. It's a plan months in the making, and one that, if it goes off without a hitch, could free their monstrous god into the world. They would strike at the very heart of their enemy, the SCP Foundation, when they least expect it, and nothing shall stand in their way. How could they lose when they have a god on their side? But why did all these normal people become violent zealots for a squid-faced deity? It all began with a dream. To those who experienced these dreams, they felt more like prophecies, premonitions of the glorious horrors to come. A red sky, billions dead, and billions more enslaved, a dark silhouette on the horizon. Their tentacled god holding dominion over all. At first, it just seemed like a strange nightmare. The ones who experienced it woke up shaken and afraid, hoping to shake the images from their mind, but they couldn't. Every night, the nightmare would return. They'd see the images, the red sky, the dead and enslaved, the tentacled god. And after a while, it would come to them even when they weren't asleep, eventually happening whenever they closed their eyes. Little by little, this scene stopped looking so hideous and started to look glorious. They felt his presence in their minds, slowly pushing them towards their inevitable future. They started to realize that they wanted him to rule over the universe and to experience the honor of serving him. Many of them abandoned their homes and families, leaving their friends and loved ones left to worry that they'd gone insane. In their eyes, they were safer than they'd ever been. They finally had purpose. They were working in service of something far greater than themselves. The influence of the tentacled god drew them closer to one another. They would meet in secret, exchanging information from the prophecies their ruler sent to them in their dreams. They worshiped together, building altars and idols to congregate around. They performed dark blood rituals involving human and animal sacrifice. It was when Brother Marsh, the Anointed One, arrived to guide them towards their true mission that things kicked into high gear. Just 3 months prior, Brother Marsh had been an office drone working in data entry for a large insurance company before the tentacled god invaded his thoughts with a simple message: "Free me, and the new world I create shall be your playground." Since then, he devoted himself completely to the cause, quitting his job and maxing out his credit cards to help fund his new life's purpose, infiltrating the SCP Foundation and releasing his inhuman ruler from its imprisonment. That was the single goal he united the cultists under: freedom for the tentacled god. And at long last, they had all the pieces in place to strike. They'd finally gathered the necessary intel to subvert the will of the most powerful secret organization on Earth. Even the strongest institution is made of people, and people are weak. Unlike the almighty tentacled god, people could be broken. The people in question were Kelly Thompson, Sidney Levitt, Jordan Broche, Dr. Juan Gutierrez, and Jillian Larson. Dr. Juan Gutierrez was a researcher with level 3 clearance on the site where the tentacled god was being contained. Sidney Levitt and Jordan Broche were both security officers charged with verifying personnel clearance on site. Kelly Thompson was a member of site administration with research authorization powers, and Jillian Larson was a research assistant who often collaborated with Dr. Gutierrez. These 5 were the key to getting access to SCP-2662 and bringing their plan to fruition. Normally, personnel dossiers on people working for the Foundation were highly confidential, but the devotees of the tentacled god had their ways. They had a number of computer experts in their ranks, more than capable of hacking in and pulling some basic information off of Foundation servers without being detected. For the other information they needed, they turned to some good old-fashioned torture, which is often the most effective method when you need some quick results. Of course, while the cult's grip on sanity may have been a little tenuous, they weren't stupid. While gathering their intel, they also made sure to find out what exactly they were up against. SCP-2662 was being held in a humanoid containment cell and guarded by on-site Task Force Tau 9, better known as the Belligerent Bodyguards. These aren't lazy, donut-chomping mall cops. These are a heavily trained, heavily armed fighting force. Though the cultists had one thing that these Foundation soldiers didn't: the element of surprise. For everything to go off perfectly, Brother Marsh's plans would have to be executed within a single day, and they were already on the clock. Tau 9 had been charged with tracking down any new SCP-2662 cults and dismantling them, and Brother Marsh knew that it was only a matter of time before the Foundation tracked them down and did the same to them. If they wanted any chance of freeing the tentacled god, then they'd need to strike quickly and with overwhelming force. The SCP-2662 worshippers were able to secure the addresses of the 5 key Foundation personnel and station members outside each of them, including one who could realistically imitate each. They waited for night to fall and broke into each of their homes as they slept. What followed was a sequence of ruthless and efficient murders done in the cause of freeing their god. Dr. Gutierrez was shot in the head while he slept. Sidney Levitt and Jordan Broche were both stabbed to death before either even realized what was happening. Thompson, who'd gotten up to use the bathroom, went down in a hail of machine gun fire. Jillian Larson had seen that masked figures were breaking into her home and attempted to flee, but was caught and beaten to death by cultists in her hallway. It was a strange irony that people whose day jobs entailed working with some of the most dangerous and nightmarish anomalies imaginable were murdered in their homes by nothing more than regular humans. So far, Brother Marsh's plan had gone perfectly, with all 5 key personnel murdered within a 2-minute period. Next, the selected doppelgangers stole clothes from their victims' closets and were handed the correct forged documentation. The next morning, each replacement began their journeys to the site where the tentacled god was being contained, while the rest of the cult armed themselves in preparation for their own part in the plan. Nobody at the Foundation seemed to notice anything amiss when the 5 arrived on site. When you work for the SCP Foundation, more mental energy is devoted to following the rules that keep you alive than to memorizing the faces of all your coworkers, and each one slipped neatly into position, disappearing into the familiarity of office life. But infiltrating the site was one thing. Getting past the belligerent bodyguards and into the cell of the tentacled god would be another thing entirely. That's where the rest of the cult would come into play. Heavily armed with whatever firearms they could get their hands on, the rest of the devotees of the tentacled god, Brother Marsh included, would attack the containment site head-on. In the ensuing chaos, the 5 cultists who had already infiltrated the site could take advantage of the distraction and break into the containment chamber. It was perfect. They launched their attack from the outside and from within. When Brother Marsh declared that the time was right, the assault began. A legion of gun-wielding cultists seemed to spring out of nowhere and started shooting up the warehouse that was a front for the containment site. The site quickly mobilized guards and task force members to take on the sudden threat, and just as Brother Marsh had anticipated, the site director called on the majority of Town 9 to help repel the violent cultists from their perimeter. Town 9 obeyed, leaving 3 task force members behind to guard SCP-2662's containment chamber. They expected to be guarding the cell from rampaging religious zealots seeking an audience with their god. What they didn't expect was a group of 5 Foundation employees walking right up to them and opening fire, killing 2 Town 9 members and taking the 3rd as hostage. While the war was being waged outside, the infiltrators had found the tentacled god's containment cell in the low-risk humanoid ward. Their hostage insisted that using him wouldn't give them any leverage. The rest of his team would neutralize the whole group, him included, if that's what it took to stop them. The infiltrators explained that using him as leverage was never their intention. He wasn't a hostage at all. He was a sacrifice. The cultists of the tentacled god detonated explosives, creating a hole in the wall and finally giving them access to their deity. They climbed through and gazed upon him in awe. There stood SCP-2662, twice as tall as a regular man, with 10 huge tentacles emerging from its back. In their months of envisioning this creature, they'd pictured it sitting on a throne made of thousands of human bones, ready to dictate its commands to the obedient liberators. What they certainly didn't expect was to see the tentacled god hunched over a computer screen. Still, gods work in mysterious ways. So they stuck to the plan and began chanting. They pulled out a sacrificial dagger and began sacrificing their captured Town 9 member. It was at this point that SCP-2662 turned and saw what they were doing with a look of pure horror. He rose up from his computer, his headphones getting caught as he did so. He told them to go away, that he didn't want them here, and that them murdering people in his bedroom like this was inconsiderate and disgusting. The cultists became even more confused. Why wasn't their god accepting their offerings? What were they doing wrong? They tried more chanting and painting arcane symbols on the floor in blood, but this just seemed to make the creature angrier. He told them, in a tone more fitting for a teenage boy than a Lovecraftian god, to just leave him alone so he could play his video games. This was seriously not cool. The cultists were baffled. They told the tentacled god that they were there to free him. He replied that he didn't need saving, that crazy stalkers like them were why he turned himself into the Foundation in the first place. Before the cultist infiltrators could get another word in, the remaining members of Town 9 stormed into the containment cell and gunned them down with surgical precision. The war outside was already over. Brother Marsh and the rest of the cultists were all killed in the firefight. Town 9 didn't look the least bit surprised upon entering 2662's cell. This was a common occurrence, unfortunately. They had to deal with an attempted cult invasion every few months, because SCP-2662's main anomalous ability is inspiring violent cults who relentlessly track down and worship it with arcane and bloodthirsty rituals. The problem is, 2662 doesn't do this consciously, and definitely doesn't like the results. That's why he's under the voluntary care of the SCP Foundation, who keeps him amused with video games and reading material, while fending off the deranged cults who try to invade and abduct him. Following the termination of the devotees of the tentacled god, just one of many cults who'd broken into 2662's containment cell, the remaining Town 9 members apologized to the tentacled creature for the disturbance, allowing him to return to his gaming. They assured him that it'd probably be at least a few more months before something like this happened again. SCP-2662's cell was repaired, and the Foundation returned to its task of seeking out would-be cult emancipators, because for the SCP Foundation, it's not always about the anomaly that's being kept in containment, but what's being kept out.
Please, good sir, I beseech you, as a man of science, nay, as a man of reason, you mustn't stifle my research at this critical juncture. You have no idea how close I am to finding a cure for this blasted pestilence. I need only a handful of live subjects to complete my research.
The Plague Doctor's emphatic pleas fell on deaf ears, as a stone-faced researcher took notes on his latest pontifications. The Doctor, whom these clods had reduced so rudely to a mere number, SCP-049, banged his gloved fist up against the wall. And to think he once thought of these men as intellectual equals, fellow travelers on the road to scientific enlightenment. What a positively sick joke. Before the Doctor got another chance to appeal for his right to experiment, the researcher left him alone once more. A truly sad state of affairs. Nobody appreciated a true scientist in this day and age. It was sure to be another day of languishing alone in his cell, wishing he had the capacity to do more. So he was surprised as anyone when the alarm started going off, and the door of his cell swung open automatically. The Plague Doctor stepped out of his cell and into the hall, where many other humanoid anomalies were roaming, confused as to why they'd been suddenly released. What was happening? As it turned out, what was happening was one of the most brutal Chaos Insurgency raids the staff of Site-19 had ever seen. It had been planned immaculately. You see, guards rotate semi-regularly at Site-19 due to the high-pressure nature of the job. Lots of deaths and mental breakdowns, as you probably correctly predicted. Even the administrative staff of the SCP Foundation are only human. Well, mostly anyway. So they're not immune to little oversights here and there. And it's in those oversights that expertly trained Chaos Insurgency infiltration agents make their living. No less than 15 of them had been working undercover in Site-19 for just over 2 weeks, and they did a fine job of lowering the metaphorical drawbridge for a heavily armed invasion force. The guards who weren't plants were quickly murdered by the infiltrators, and even some of the on-site task forces were quickly overwhelmed and gunned down by the high-precision rifles of the Chaos Insurgency's finest. While the frontliners were distracted by the sudden assault, the infiltrators found their way to the site's security control room and massacred everyone inside. Opening every single door in the site was as simple as putting in a few stolen key codes and flipping a few carefully remembered switches. Consequently, while Foundation agents and Chaos Insurgency mercenaries clashed sabers, high-priority anomalies like SCP-049 simply wandered the facility, watching the calamity unfold within. The Foundation was beset on all sides, shot at by heavily armed maniacs, and attacked from within by the numerous roaming anomalous entities that were eager to get their hands on Foundation personnel. Definitely not an ideal situation, to say the least. The Plague Doctor only had one thing on his mind, though.
This definitely won't do my research any good, unless I can escape and find my way to a suitable laboratory. Oh, now there's an idea.
But his scientific fantasies were soon interrupted by a Chaos Insurgency soldier swinging the butt of his M4 carbine into his avian exoskull with a supremely unpleasant crack. The Doctor was dazed by it momentarily, the pain coming at him like a thunderclap, but the insurgent never got the chance to take another swing. Before the insurgent could do anything, the Plague Doctor lunged out with practiced speed, grasping him by the throat. Immediately, everything went black, and the insurgent's limp corpse collapsed to the ground.
Serves him right,
the Doctor internally mused.
Soldiers attacking medics is violating even the most basic rules of gentlemanly warfare.
Then another flash of immense pain, as a different rifle butt collided with the back of his head. The Doctor fell to one knee, feeling dizzy, but before he could retaliate, he felt the 2 sharp prongs of a cattle prod pressing up against his neck. The sudden rush of electricity surged through his neck, sending his muscles into a wave of involuntary spasms. The insurgents crowding around him chimed in with their own agonizing cattle prods, relentlessly shocking him until the flashes of white-hot pain soon became an oppressive blanket of total dark. Even on his most cantankerous days, The SCP Foundation had never treated him like this. When he eventually came to, he was still in darkness, standing upright, with high-tech shackles holding every limb in place. It was beyond uncomfortable for the poor plague doctor, but it succeeded in the task of keeping him under control. He couldn't move an inch. There were muffled voices beyond the dark, beyond the confines of this new containment. The modulated gas mask voices of insurgents and something else. Faintly accented, oddly familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Soon the voices were replaced by another sound, the grinding of crowbars levering nails out of cheap wood. With a creaking tumble, a rectangle of bright light opened up in front of him, populated by a number of silhouettes. On either side were Chaos insurgents in familiar tactical garb, and in between them stood a tall, well-groomed man with an expensive-looking purple smoking jacket and a pencil mustache. For a few fractions of a second, his face was a portrait of excitement, but as he took in the sight of the plague doctor standing before him, all the joy drained from his snooty countenance.
What the hell am I looking at here?
The man in the smoking jacket said. The doctor, indignant at such a response from the man who'd presumably ordered his assault, rasped,
A man of science, good sir.
The man in the smoking jacket ignored him and continued to berate the Chaos insurgents, with an odd level of confidence for someone reprimanding trained cold-blooded killers.
I wanted SCP-650, the startling statue, not this clownish Ren Fair cosplayer. What the hell did I pay you ruffians for? I was told you Chaos insurgents were the very best at this, and for your hefty price, I expect excellence.
The rant continued much like this, leaving everyone in attendance, the insurgents, the plague doctor, feeling thoroughly exhausted by him and unable to do anything about it. You see, this wasn't just any Chaos insurgency client, your average tin pot dictator or arms dealer. You know the type. This was the one and only Pascal Leggett, one of the most famous, or rather infamous, anart collectors in the game. He'd been a founding person of interest for years due to his dealings with the Chaos Insurgency and Marshall Carter and Dark Limited, all to the end of expanding his anart collection, but his vast wealth and connections had always shielded him from Foundation probes. For those unfamiliar with the subculture, anart, short for anomalous art, is exactly what it sounds like. Artistic projects with anomalous properties to give it that extra kick. One of the most popular groups of interest dealing in anart is the iconic Are We Cool Yet?, which, incidentally, had recently excommunicated Pascal Leggett for being an exceedingly wealthy, uptight square who really didn't represent the collective's rebellious ethos. And considering his response was to pay the Chaos Insurgency to raid Site-19 for a few pieces for his own private collection, costing him millions of dollars and both groups' many lives, it was safe to say he wasn't taking it well.
Look, we got you that other statue and that thing killed 4 of our best guys, so how about we just call it even?
Said one of the insurgents.
I'm sure you can have fun with bird brain here too.
Pascal tutted and reluctantly dismissed the hired guns. Having the plague doctor here definitely wasn't ideal, especially considering he wanted to host the ultimate anart exhibition to put Are We Cool Yet worthless Sommes-nous devenus magnifiques to shame. But he would make do with what he had. Perhaps he could say that 049 was a commentary on the ever-present nature of disease in mankind's life, and our forever archaic approach to it.
Yes, that would do nicely.
Needless to say, the plague doctor was infuriated by all this. The violence against his person, the kidnapping, the disrespect, and most of all, the interruption to his precious research, especially considering how close he'd gotten to finding a cure for the pestilence. But instead, he was soon spirited by a legion of heavily armed goons from his wooden box to a glass one in one of Leggett's many opulent hallways. There were other glass cases on either side of him, and more on the other side of the hall, all too reinforced for the plague doctor to even smash through it on his own. Damn it. Leggett's own private anart exhibition, probably wedged between his oversized dining room and his jewel-encrusted crapper. Occasionally, Pascal himself would jaunt down the hallway to gaze upon his new stolen anart pieces, and of course the plague doctor would try his best to reason with him.
I am a patient man, Monsieur Leggett, but this is simply barbaric. By what right do you imprison me here? Is your intention to deprive the world, the entire human race, of my valuable medical breakthroughs? Could you live with that on your conscience, good sir?
There was never any meaningful response. The plague doctor soon learned that Pascal Leggett didn't like his art interactive. It was simply meant to languish away in a glass box, being watched, being passively looked at. Those Chaos Insurgency louts hadn't even bothered to bring his notebook or medical bag, so he was without the tools to even perform his experiments. As loathed as he was to admit it, this was even worse than being locked up by the SCP Foundation. But all this wasn't entirely unfamiliar. There was something in the glass box across from the Plague Doctor that he vaguely recognized back from Site-19. He'd never seen it up close, but he'd heard researchers speaking about it, and even seen a few pictures. And such a strange construction it was. A peculiar, haphazard sculpture made from concrete, rebar, and spray paint. Quite ugly, in this humble doctor's opinion, but there was something oddly entrancing about it. And for reasons beyond the doctor's recollection, 4 of Leggette's men stood around the glass box in where it was being stored, always watching. The men were frequently switched in and out, as though they were watching in shifts, always fixing their gaze on its peculiar, malformed body. Maybe it was all the electrical shocks and knocks to the head, but he just couldn't remember why Pascal was having the piece so carefully observed. But he knew on some primal level that the secret to this would perhaps be the key to his own escape. If only he could remember. Still, time passed. Pascal drifted in and out, sometimes with guests. The Plague Doctor had learned not to speak. These animals could not be reasoned with. As a scientist, he would instead carefully observe until his observations bore fruit. He noticed that Pascal's guests, all people who looked equally as wealthy and pompous as Pascal himself, all seemed to look right over him, and instead focus on the ugly statue across the hall, still forever observed by any 4 of Pascal's men. Some of them looked actively nervous, just being in its presence. Curious, the Plague Doctor made a mental note of this, just as he did when Pascal gave his guests a reassuring pat on the shoulder and told them,
Please calm yourself. It's harmless while my personnel are keeping an eye on it.
Little by little, the Plague Doctor's memories of his infamous neighbor had begun to return. He knew what he must do to escape. Now all he needed to do was wait for the perfect moment. Soon enough, Pascal's mansion was filled with a bevy of Anart snobs from hither and yon. A private soiree to show off his new collection. They wandered the halls in 3-piece tuxedos and designer ballroom dresses, sipping champagne from imported crystal. All such lovely, refined, high society people. And if the good doctor's plan went off as he intended, they would all be such lovely, refined, high society corpses. The Plague Doctor waited until, mercifully, he and the 4 members of personnel watching the sculpture were the only ones left in the hallway. He'd been so good, so patient, that none of the men guarding the sculpture at present had ever heard him make a noise. He was so invisible to them that, in all likelihood, they probably didn't even notice he could make a sound. And that worked for his purposes just fine. Though in any case, if he wanted this to work, he would need to time his plan perfectly. Even a fraction of a second out of place and the whole thing would have dire consequences. Still, the Doctor was still a Frenchman at heart. And as a Frenchman, he knew he would rather die nobly in the process of escape than remain captured by this worthless buffoon. He'd be sure to take as many of these men down with him in the process as he was able. The Plague Doctor exhaled deeply, drawing a lungful of air, then bellowed as loud as he possibly could. The sudden, unexpected noise was so shocking that it jogged the 4 watchers almost reflexively to turn and look at him. And in the split second that they did, the Plague Doctor closed his eyes. In the dark, time seemed to move slower, perhaps due to the Doctor's keen focus, cultivated over many a century. He listened carefully to the sequence of sounds: glass shattering, 4 choked gasps in sequence, 4 brutal crunches, then nanoseconds later, more glass shattering. The Plague Doctor's eyes snapped open just in time. Just as predicted, the sculpture, being entirely unobserved, had smashed through its glass case, murdering all 4 members of personnel by snapping their necks, and then smashed through his own glass case to do the same to him. The Plague Doctor had cut it so close, in fact, that he opened his eyes to the face of the sculpture staring into his own, its concrete limbs wrapped around his neck. Very good timing indeed. With a sigh of relief, the Plague Doctor slipped out of the sculpture's concrete grasp and back down the hallway, keeping his gaze fixed on the sculpture the entire time. He had heard it decimate Pascal's men. He certainly didn't fancy undergoing the same fate. the second the Plague Doctor backed around the corner, rendering the sculpture, or as the SCP Foundation called it, SCP-173 out of sight, he could hear terrified screaming coming from the other end of the hall. He was not a sadistic man, but the Plague Doctor would be lying if he told you he didn't take just a little bit of pleasure in hearing that sound. Somewhere else in the vast mansion of Pascal Leggett, the sculpture was slaughtering its way through servants and party guests, while the Plague Doctor searched for some kind of exit. Anyone who dared get in his way was given a swift and merciless touch of death, sending their body unceremoniously to the ground. Anyone in his way was preventing him from finding a cure for the pestilence, and thus endangering countless lives. It was, of course, regrettable to have to kill anyone, but some sacrifices must be made for the greater good of mankind. While it's not necessarily always regrettable per se. On his way out while the murderous rampage of SCP-173 seemed to distract anyone of note, the Plague Doctor just so happened to encounter a fleeing Pascal Leggett, hoping to find some kind of escape himself. It seemed that now fate was on his side once more. To have his jailer right here in the palm of his hand would be such a perfect parting gift. Funnily enough, Pascal was far more talkative to him now. He rattled off a rapid-fire series of threats, bribes, and pleas, claiming in the end that he never meant any harm. He was the one who freed the Plague Doctor from the SCP Foundation. They were on the same side here. All this was for the art. No offense was ever intended. Pascal Leggett simply lived for art.
Then die for it, good sir,
the Plague Doctor said. And with a single touch, Pascal's eyes rolled up into the back of his head, and he fell to the ground, dead. It was one of the few non-scientific deaths that he felt truly no guilt for. After some time searching, the screams around the rest of the mansion eventually went silent. That did wonders for his focus. It didn't take long for the Plague Doctor to locate an exit, a fine mahogany door with elaborate adornments befitting a man as gaudy as Pascal, and began strolling towards it, his chest swollen with pride and a sense of accomplishment. Then he blinked, and a few feet in front of him stood the sculpture. It was there so suddenly that the Plague Doctor fell backwards in shock, but he devoted everything to keeping an eye on that monstrosity. With everyone else in the mansion presumably dead at this point, it had now come back for him. It stood there staring silently, ready to exact the terrible price for freeing it as soon as the Doctor dared to blink. The Plague Doctor began crawling backwards down the hall, just wanting to put some distance between himself and the sculpture. As the seconds passed, he could feel his eyes drying out until the inevitable blink. The sculpture was standing right in front of him now, gazing down, almost mocking. It had closed the distance so quickly. If the Plague Doctor blinked again, he was sure that his eyes would never open again. All it had to do was wait as the seconds passed, and the Doctor began to feel his eyes drying up again. That subtle sting quickly grew into a nagging pain that could not be denied. Sooner or later, he was going to have to. Bang! The front door flew open, and in an instant the hallway was filled with heavily armed troops, all wearing the familiar black and gray of the SCP Foundation. The Plague Doctor had never been so relieved to see the organization that had kept him locked up for so many decades. For once they'd saved him from something even worse. Of course, the sculpture didn't say anything, but the disappointment of losing that one more victim seemed to radiate off of it like a lingering bad smell. The Plague Doctor willingly gave himself up, and heavy machinery was brought in to pick up SCP-173, with the help of the iPods to make sure it didn't try any funny business in transit. Pascal had gotten away with his shady dealings for years, but the brazen attack he funded against Site-19 was now enough for the Foundation to track him down. When his corpse was found in the halls of his own home with no obvious cause of death, we can happily tell you that nobody was disappointed. By the evening, the Plague Doctor was happy to be back in his cell. His research could continue here, and in time he knew that the personnel of the SCP Foundation would listen to reason and comply with his demands. After all, science marches on, regardless of who chooses to march with it. But he would forever feel a little nervous in Site-19 after that, knowing the concrete monster he was sharing the building with. He hoped that if ever there was another containment breach involving that thing, that it didn't feel like paying him a visit for old time's sake. The whole earth seemed to rumble beneath him as Carlos Garcia stood there, standing up at the hulking, shadowy mass towering over him. His knees were shaking, and sweat was running down his face, but he clenched his jaw and stayed put. Furious voices hurled abuse at him from all angles. The stench of gasoline and wood smoke filled the air as the rumbling grew louder and louder. Gripping the camcorder tightly, Carlos pointed it straight up at the enormous excavator that was belching out smoke just feet away from him. Angry men in high-visibility jackets hung off the sides of it, making hand gestures at him and even throwing rocks. But Carlos found, much to his surprise, that his filming hand was steady. He panned the lens across the view in front of him. Excavators, lumberjacks, standing on cut-down tree trunks as thick as motorcycles, and then up into the lush canopies of the Amazon rainforest with its rich, dark green leaves, dense knotted vines, colorful fruits, and terrified ecosystem. Colorful birds watched the scene with nervous eyes, ready to take off at a moment's notice. All of the larger animals had either run away or been killed long before he showed up. Carlos swung the camcorder back down to the mercenaries chopping down his beloved rainforest and jabbed a finger at them.
You will not put your axe to the trunk of one more tree without first cutting me down!
Sick of waiting, the workmen climbed back into their vehicles and started revving their engines. It was all for show, Carlos told himself. That's all it was. They were just trying to scare him, but it was working. He was scared. The excavator in front of him crept slowly forward with tires that were taller than he was. A foot away, 6 inches away, and then an inch away. Carlos closed his eyes and readied himself to be run over, but the pain never came. A whining, chewing noise came from the engine, as if the vehicle was suddenly trapped on something, unable to turn its wheels. Carlos opened his eyes and tried to peer around the edge of the vehicle to see what was going on at the back. There was a new note in the voices of the workmen around him. They didn't seem so angry anymore, more fearful. Carlos went to take a step to see what was going on, but his foot caught and he was trapped. Looking down, he saw that he had somehow managed to lodge his foot beneath a small tree root. He tried to pull himself free, but the grip tightened. All of a sudden, the roots wound tightly around his boots, instantly crushing his foot and breaking every bone inside of it. Carlos screamed, but through the dullness of terror that was filling his mind, he realized no one else would hear him because they were all too busy screaming themselves. The root wasn't just tightening around his foot, now it was pulling him, dragging him. The dirt parted around his crushed foot as the root dragged him down into the earth. It wasn't that the ground was swallowing him, it was that the root was pulling so hard that the ground broke apart around his body. The pressure was unbelievable as first his ankle, then his knee, and then his hip went under. He felt the bones in his pelvis crunching and breaking as his other leg was forced into an unnatural split. It would be good to tell you that Carlos Garcia had a quick death from that point, that he felt no pain as his body was wrenched down into the earth. But no, he died very slowly, in a tremendous amount of fear and pain, as his lungs steadily filled up with earth, and his bones splintered and crunched one by one. One of the most admirable traits of the human race has always been our ability to find a home anywhere. From the Inuit people living in the Arctic Circle, all the way through to the ancient Egyptians building colossal pyramids in the middle of arid deserts, humanity always finds a way to make a home. Anthropologists can look all over the world and find traces of human settlements virtually anywhere. One of the remaining bastions where tribal populations can still exist and flourish is the Amazon rainforest. Life can be difficult and fiercely competitive, but the rich, fertile ground and abundance of food sources have meant that the Amazon has always been home to small human settlements. That is why researchers were so perplexed by the existence of a dark spot within the rainforest. After decades of work, not one trace of human life has been found within this area. For good reason. For a very good reason. Foundation agent Natalie Richards made her way quickly down the stairs, spiraling downwards and downwards. She had never much enjoyed the descent. Something about waking up in the morning and knowing that she would wind up back down here again went beyond the usual Monday blues. It was more insidious. She had barely slept all week. It wasn't just the sticky heat of the barracks at the Paragon South America Forward Operating Site that kept her awake. It was the paranoia. She would just lie there in her bed, experiencing these delusions that at any point, a root would shoot up out of the ground and wrap itself around her neck. It never happened, of course. Their accommodations had been built high up, suspended among the trees away from the site to mitigate any risk. But still, it would always get worse when it was her turn on the observation deck. Down and down she descended through the tower, feeling that horrible, pressurizing feeling that tells you you're going further underground. The air she was breathing down here was filtered by enormous top-of-the-line systems that made sure the air within the tower was clean and fresh. There was an entire department dedicated to the filtration system set up in each of the 4 towers. And yet, she couldn't help imagining that tendrils of fog creeping through the vents to get to her. Suddenly, she was there on the observation deck. She hadn't had time to brace herself, so the view, even though she had seen it dozens of times before, punched her right in the stomach and left her feeling dizzy. On the other side of the glass was a void. The research team had told her that it was 53 kilometers across at its widest point and 42 kilometers at its deepest. Those kinds of numbers meant nothing to her. The reality was that it was darkness, a rotten abyss, open and unending. She was in Tower Charlie, one of 4 observation towers suspended upside down from the roof of the cavern. At the bottom of the tower, what usually would have been the top, was the searchlight. Its beam cut steadily through the abyss like a lighthouse in the dead of night. The beam drifted through empty space. The only way you could even tell it was lit up was the slight haze in the air. Suddenly, the searchlight found its target. Just a branch at first, nothing thicker than a car, snaking its way to join with another and another, growing thicker by multitudes each time, until suddenly the light was shining on the trunk, 380 meters in diameter, 9.2 kilometers tall. The colossal tree hung upside down from the roof of the void, dangling into the abyss. Natalie Richards gulped and tried to breathe deeply so as not to lose her balance. It was her job now to stare at this tree for the next 3 hours. She felt sick. SCP-6666 is a colossal botanical entity that can be found near the coordinates 4 degrees 51 minutes 29.4 seconds south by 67 degrees 44 minutes 12.6 seconds west in the Amazon rainforest. Research has been ongoing for several years to fully map and understand the scale of both the tree itself and the void in which it inhabits. Project Paragon was instituted in an attempt to understand and one day contain the growth of this entity. Above ground, an exclusion zone has been set up covering the area where the roots of this tree have grown through to the surface. A 1-kilometer buffer has been established just outside of the circumference, with a heavily armed security presence patrolling it at all times. Unfortunately, due to the nature of SCP-6666, this buffer zone has to be moved on a normal weekly basis. While samples taken from this SCP seem to indicate that it is totally dead, organically speaking, the root system still possesses a degree of autonomy, being able to move and grow at rates unseen in typical plant species. The roots are capable of breaking through the surface and constricting organic life living above, primarily targeting humans, but also targeting buildings, vehicles, and machinery. It is no wonder then that there is no trace of any human settlements, either contemporary or historical, anywhere near SCP-6666. She knew that the Foundation has been at a loss for progress over the prior few months. Their equipment and resources were deteriorating faster than they were making progress with their research. No one had been down to the floor yet. They were all too afraid to. Descending down through the void, Agent Richard saw something that made her heart drop. Out of the gap in the trunk of SCP-6666 emerged a hand. It clung to the bark with enormous fingers, straining and pulling as the entity dragged itself out from its hiding place. Arm after arm emerged, with one carrying a spear that must have been 20 meters long. 5 arms in total clung to the tree as SCP-6666-A surveyed the vehicle flying past it. The entity didn't swipe at the VTOL. It didn't do anything to attack it, but it just watched before slowly turning its face towards Agent Richards in the observation tower. It had 6 eyes arranged into columns running down the length of its face. It had no nose, no mouth, and no ears, but it saw her. It saw her even better than she could see it. She felt panic rising in her chest. Meanwhile, the research team and the VTOL checked their equipment one more time. They had been outfitted with a brand new set of custom pressurized insertion suits, but they weren't stupid. Nothing was 100% safe from reach, and having studied the fog down here for month after month, they knew just how deadly it could be if there was even the slightest contamination. Down and down, the craft descended kilometer after kilometer through utter blackness, until through the front window, they were able to see a thick layer of fog coating the basement of the cabin. The lead researcher stood at the front of the VTOL and gave them one more briefing, emphasizing the importance of moving slowly and safely, not touching anything that could compromise the integrity of their suits, and making sure to collect as many physical samples as possible to take back up to the surface for study. Agent Richards stared at the demon in front of her. Even through the very enforced glass, she could hear the low rumbling of its voice as it spoke to her. Researchers have been trying to understand what language it was for years now, but with no luck. It was either so ancient or so alien that it was beyond their ability to translate. The entity had a name, however. From speaking to researchers on Project Paragon adjacent to SCP-3840, they have been able to name the creature, the Demon Hector, one of 4 primeval entities originating from a long since lost near-human civilization, millions of years old at least. Who knows? It may even predate the existence of Earth entirely. Of course, we can't simply mention the concept of 4 primeval demons without telling you a little bit about the other 3, some of which you might even recognize. One of them, known as SCP-2254 to the SCP Foundation, is also known as the Demon Lahire. Much like Hector, Lahire is a 6-eyed being of immense power, presiding over his own domain. He is invisible to the naked eye and spends his free time influencing the minds of human beings, when he's not impregnating them with fleshy masses. Next comes the entity known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-4840-B, also known as the Demon Lancelot. Once a brave knight of King Cyrus VIII von Apollyon before being corrupted, this immensely powerful being resides in SCP-4840, the flying city of Autopopodopolis. And rounding out this elite group of mysterious demonic entities comes SCP-6765-D, also known as the Demon Ogier, a horrific cloaked entity that sits atop a throne of blood. It's widely believed these 4 entities were cursed by an unknown and immensely powerful thaumatological being long ago, doomed to hide in ancient places and live until they fulfill their true purpose, playing a part in some known event that will someday compromise all of mankind. And now, Agent Richards was face to face with 1/4 of the apocalypse. Agent Richards stared as the Demon Hector spoke to her. Dozens of kilometers below, the VTOL touched down in the fog. As soon as the deployment doors opened, the thick gas filled the aircraft, obscuring their vision. Turning on their helmet cameras, the researchers stepped out into the unknown as their live feeds were watched by their colleagues on the surface. Smooth stone surfaces covered with etchings swam into view. Some kind of ancient language carved into stone? The remnants of some early South American civilization? No, the researchers on the surface knew immediately that what they were looking at was far too advanced, far too old. Was it? Was it even human at all? A scream filled the control room. A breach in a researcher's suit. The fog that he breathed in contained just a few particles, set the neurons in his brain on fire before shutting down his nervous system entirely in a matter of seconds. The rest of the researchers all ran back to the VTOL in fear, but the fog around them was so dense that they couldn't find it anywhere. It could have been 3 feet away from them, and they would have never even known. One by one, the researchers in the foggy forest dropped dead. On the surface, the research team sighed and closed the video feeds. There was a reason they'd sent them down with live cameras. No one had really expected them to return. And all the while, Agent Natalie Richards stood trembling and watching as the Demon Hector hung from the upside-down tree and chanted at her in his impossible language. She didn't care what any of the botanists said. This tree was not dead. The demon readied its spear and leaped at her. Diego had only just found his footing when it gave out underneath him again. Crashing to the ground, he threw both arms over his head just in time to protect his skull from the rain of boulders that came down past him. They grazed his arms and jarred painfully against his muscles, but it was better than having them hit him in the head. Without a moment to spare, Diego got straight up to his feet and continued running back down the trail he had been trying to follow. The ground shifted and lurched in all directions under him, threatening to throw off his balance at any moment. Having lived in Chile his whole life, he had gotten used to earthquakes, but he had never been in the center of one like this. The problem was that the trail he had been following to get up here was disappearing fast as the dust swirled into the air and boulders landing all around him. He just had to keep running in this direction and hope for the best. There weren't any other options. But suddenly, he found himself running uphill. Stumbling forwards, Diego tried desperately to get his bearings. He had spent the previous 3 hours hiking up the mountains, so how was it that now that he had turned around and gone back, he was still going uphill? It was almost as if the ground was changing shape beneath him as he ran. Dust filled his lungs as he tried to wipe it away from his burning eyes. Yes, the ground was definitely going uphill, but it felt almost as if it was lifting itself up beneath him, as if some tectonic plates were grinding together, creating a new mountain beneath his feet. Diego lurched unsteadily and grabbed the nearest rock to keep his balance, feeling the ground lifting higher and higher beneath him. Then, all of a sudden, the cloud of dust broke, and he was in fresh air rising ever higher into the sky. The Andes Mountains stabbed out of the clouds all around him, cutting beautiful shapes across the horizon. He felt his own mountain steadily growing taller than any of them. He dropped down on all floors and clutched at the ground in terror as he tried his best to take in the shape of what he was now standing upon. How far would you go to prevent a cosmic-level disaster? It's one thing to save your friends and family from an armed murderer. It's another thing to fight for your country in a world war. We can even just about imagine what it means to fight for our planet, to save our species from climate change, to save our world from a meteorite. But what would a cosmic disaster look like? A calamity so broad in scale that it surpasses our ability to even perceive the threat. We could point our most advanced telescope into deep space and look straight down the middle of it and never know it was even there. And if that threat was not simply to the survival of humanity or planet Earth, but to the survival of existence itself, how far would we go to prevent it? What cruel and inhumane measures would you take to have such a threat? Or better yet, how many people would you kill to save the world? This debate is raging right now as you sit here and watch this video. Not among the Foundation, but between two SCPs so grand in scale and so advanced in nature that the Foundation has no option but to sit and listen as the pair debate what to do with the human race. SCP-4568-1 was not difficult to discover once it started moving. In fact, it was almost impossible to ignore. Earthquakes have been tearing across South America for centuries, destroying homes, taking the lives of innocent people, and fundamentally changing the shape of our planet itself. What most people do not realize, however, is that the fault line running through the Andes mountain range has actually largely been dormant during this period. The source of the earthquakes has come from something far more mysterious. Our innocent hiker, Diego, had been spending the week walking among the Andes when the earthquake struck. You would be forgiven for assuming, as Diego did, that the ground rising beneath his feet was a new mountain forming as the tectonic plates clashed together. But the staggering reality of the situation was that he found himself hiking along the back of SCP-4568-1. As the creature raised its head into the air, Diego saw the head of a serpent lifting several kilometers away from him. Its body stretched and wound its way through the mountain range, filling the valleys and running beneath his feet. The scale of SCP-4568-1 is hard to convey. Measuring over 500 kilometers in length, this serpent is longer than most US states, with a 20-kilometer width. Standing on the back of it quite literally feels like standing on a mountain range. For context, the horizon at sea level is about 4.8 kilometers away, so multiply that by 4 and you'll get a sense of just how wide this thing is. Even small movements from this SCP are enough to trigger continent-wide earthquakes, with tremors being felt all the way around the world. Upon the initial discovery of this SCP, the Foundation was unable to determine why it remains dormant for such long periods and seems to only awaken sporadically and for brief periods of time. That was, until SCP-4568-2 was discovered. It is little wonder that the second serpent took so long to be found. Its body is comprised almost entirely of water, sand, algae, and steam. It does not show up on sonar scans and is incredibly difficult to detect in the water, even visually. Its form is loosely defined whilst dormant, with broadly similar measurements to SCP-4568-1. This serpent roams the South Pacific Ocean. Any marine creatures that swim into the SCP's body find themselves undergoing beneficial mutations. Crabs grow extra pinchers, bottom feeders grow larger mouths, and sharks find themselves developing heightened senses and even extra hearts. These marine animals seem to undergo virtually no distress and are free to exit and re-enter the SCP's body at any point. Initially, SCP-4568-2 was believed to be the peaceful one of the pair. Both serpents seemed to become active at the same time. While on land, SCP-4568-1 would wreak havoc with magnitude 7 earthquakes in major metropolitan areas. The sea serpent's function was less well understood. Employing resonant frequencies and vibrations, this SCP was able to give its watery body a distinct form as it rose up from the ocean and towered above the waves. In order to maintain its shape and control its movements, this SCP employed a huge amount of energy. However, the Foundation quickly observed that it was rarely able to maintain its form for very long. As soon as the sea serpent rose out of the water, its mountainous twin would begin to move, sending tremors around the world that disrupted the frequency needed for SCP-4568-2 to remain animate. Exhausted and unable to maintain its shape, the sea serpent would fall into another period of dormancy, gliding lazily through the oceans. But this dormancy suited the Foundation. Without the constant seismic tremors, researchers could work fast. 2 operating bases were set up to monitor each SCP. 2 mirrored bases with mirrored teams in constant communication with one another. As soon as one team made a discovery, it was conveyed to the others and vice versa. One operating base was set up high in the Andes Mountains, specifically designed to be as earthquake-proof as possible, capable of withstanding earthquakes up to 9.9 magnitude. Meanwhile, in the South Pacific Ocean, an underwater research center was built just above the seabed, with regular vessels drifting out into the unknown to gather whatever data they could about the great SCPs. Several early findings stood out. Firstly, SCP-4568-1 appeared to have a very different internal structure from its twin. Researchers initially assumed that the creature would be largely composed of earth minerals and rock, as its exterior appearance suggested. However, scans of its body indicated the presence of what can only be assumed to be artificially created components. Great gears resembling clockwork structures and even rudimentary circuitry were present throughout the creature's body. The function or origin of these gears has yet to be determined, especially as there is no evident way that their movement corresponds to the autonomy and movement of the serpent itself. The far more striking discovery, however, came when the SCP Foundation discovered a way to communicate with the 2 beasts. Ultra-low frequency waves capable of traveling vast distances, even light years, were discovered to be emitted from the 2 serpents' heads at intermittent periods. The Foundation had to develop some of the largest antennae ever created to pick up these frequencies and interpret the data coming through them. What they found were 2 twins locked in a fierce debate about the fate of humanity and the universe itself. It was only then that the motivations of these 2 serpents started to make sense. In 2010, almost as soon as the Foundation was able to tap into the frequency, they were contacted directly by SCP-4568-1.
Foundation, I know that you can hear me. I will not apologize for my actions. I know that I am the reason that millions of your kind face their demise. I know your pain, and I feel it too, but I shall never apologize for it. I simply ask you to listen to myself and to my word cannot be translated. You are curious, you can be patient. Exercise that.
and you may one day understand. And listen, the Foundation did. Efforts to contain or destroy the two serpents were put on the back burner. Instead, Foundation agents prioritized spreading disinformation across South America and beyond about the source of these earthquakes. The two serpents are far too large and far too powerful to overcome or contain. Instead, the Foundation prioritized the use of amnestic drugs, disinformation, and the creation of fringe conspiracy groups to discredit any claims of the serpents' respective existences. Meanwhile, some of the most senior leadership figures in the Foundation were and still are locked in a fierce debate as to what to do with the twin serpents. By listening to the communication between the two SCPs, the Foundation discovered that SCP-4568-2 is intent on wiping out the entire human race. The only thing that has prevented it from being able to do so thus far has been the existence of the other serpent. Every time that SCP-4568-2 begins to mount an attack on humanity, its land-bearing twin triggers enormous earthquakes to disrupt its progress. But why would the sea serpent want to destroy the human race? As Foundation generals gathered in the deep sea operations base, SCP-4568-2 came to the observation window to look them in the eyes as it told them,
I am sure you can see it. How your world dies a little bit more every day. Mostly by your own hand, no? You poison the oceans, taint the rivers, blacken the skies. You do not need angels of death to destroy your world. But there is something else. I see it in the bottom of your eyes. Something unforgettable, unconceivable ideas cloaked in madness and impossible colors. Do you think I will let you drag the rest of the world down with yourselves? Do you think I will leave this world, my world, to die in flames? It sees your world, and it comes in fives.
Since this revelation, the Foundation has poured countless hours and resources into trying to identify a cosmic threat. For well over a decade, many of the smartest scientists the world has to offer have looked to the night sky, scanning for this impossible color, this shroud of madness, but to no avail. Some within the Foundation believe the serpent is lying, trying to make up an excuse to justify its genocide, but information from SCP-4568-1 seems to confirm everyone's worst fears.
Your minds burn bright, Foundation. All of humanity shines from this rock, like a candle in a dark room. It sees you. An idea exists only because something thought of it. Have you ever considered how such terrible concepts could have been given form? What kind of atrocious mind could even think about it? Humans cannot conceive the colorless green. What if you are playing into this creature's hands?
There appears to be an underlying implication that ideas are the source of power somehow. This colorless green, this unimaginable cosmic threat, seems to be a monstrous idea incarnate. But whose idea? Humanity's? There is a deep lore that the two serpents discuss with one another, one that makes little sense even to this day to the Foundation. They talk of gods and goddesses, deities of flesh, of steel and gears, and of the fives. Quite what these creatures are, if they are even creatures at all, is a mystery to the Foundation. Researchers have not discovered a way of communicating back with the two serpents directly. Attempts to mimic their language or transmit signals asking questions to them have largely been ignored. Instead, they address humanity and the Foundation as a whole, seeming to take the view of the human race as being a collective hive mind, one that they are evidently able to tap into. The pair seem uninterested in informing us as to exactly what this threat is, or explaining who the gods and goddesses are. Perhaps they assume we know these things already, or more likely, they believe that our consciousness is not yet capable of perceiving the scale and depth of the concepts that they are debating. What is clear, however, is their shared understanding that if humanity were to be eliminated, the candle was to be blown out, this cosmic threat would pass by. The pair have names. Trenten is the land serpent, while remaining dormant much of the time in an enormous cave system beneath the Andes Mountains. This serpent seems keen to help the Foundation in some way. Kai, the sea serpent, is intent on sacrificing the human race for a greater good, one far beyond our understanding. Speaking to the Foundation in the Andes Mountains, Trenten gave a short speech that served both as encouragement and a terrible warning of the darkness to come. It is something I like about you, Foundation, about mankind. While it is easy to just take the simplest path, to just give up, there will always be some among you who refuse this path, who do the right thing. Maybe not all of you are this strong, but I can see it in your methods. Those so-called containment procedures. There will always be someone who stands up against the dark, even if it takes 1,000 million years to emerge victorious. Maybe you can stop the fifth. After all, ideas can be killed with better ideas, even if it takes 1,000 million years. The fist collides with Humphrey's face, crumpling him to the ground like a cheap, greasy Burger King wrapper. He feels the lingering sting of the punch on his skin and in the marrow of his cheekbone. The man who punched him, a tall, muscular, handsome man we'll refer to as Chad, stands above him with his fist still clenched. According to Chad, Humphrey Bingham, the pale, doughy 43-year-old lying on the ground with a bruise forming on his cheek, had been inappropriately hitting on his girlfriend. She told him to deal with the situation, and he had. With one definitive bark to leave his beloved alone, Chad turns and walks away, leaving Humphrey on the ground, his face and pride equally bruised. A few hours later, Humphrey is sitting alone in a train car, rattling down the tracks in the direction of his depressing bachelor's apartment. He's shaking with rage. People, they're disgusting creatures, really, he thinks to himself. Worthless animals that are capable of nothing but cruelty and exclusion. They always let him down, always hurt him, always made fun of him. Every day, getting up to face loneliness and isolation felt like being attacked by a pack of wild dogs. One thought rings loud and clear in his mind. It'd be best if someone had the guts to just wipe out the human race. No, even more than that. Annihilate all life in existence. Wipe clean the slate and salt the earth so that somebody or something more worthy could grow. That was the fate everyone else deserved for making his 43 years on this earth so miserable. But beneath all that, there is another thought that's making him smile. He's got a plan that nobody else knows about. A plan to make everyone pay for every time they've crossed Humphrey Bingham. Humphrey, you see, has an interesting job. He works at an infectious disease laboratory. Fans of apocalyptic fiction are probably putting together the picture already. Maybe he's going to leak an infectious pathogen, or even worse, combine and engineer multiple pathogens together in order to make this supervirus capable of bringing humanity to its knees. But that's where you would be wrong. Humphrey does have a vial in his coat containing traces of the bubonic plague, but his intentions with it are actually far weirder. Soon enough, he arrives home and secretes himself away in his bleak little apartment. It is a drab and gray place, except, of course, for his weapons. Bizarre and impossible blades, iridescent like oil slicks in a crazed rainbow of variety. Blades of all shapes and sizes, from daggers to switchblades to axes that technically weren't legal to own. You see, Humphrey Bingham is what we know as a mall ninja, a slang term for someone who buys cheap and impractical decorative weapons for display around their home. But the pride of his collection has to be the Apocalyptic death metal sword, as he's dubbed it. It sits on a stand in the middle of all the others, bright purple and covered in so many sharp edges it's almost impossible to hold. He has been refining and perfecting it for years. In some places, the edges are a single atom thin, giving them inconceivable cutting power. And when we say that he has been perfecting it, we don't just mean sharpening and polishing. Littered around the room are different volumes on the occult, particularly those concerned with enchanting objects. He's been conducting spells and rituals, grinding up desert locust shells and illegally purchased human bones, and saying incantations. He's drawn all the proper pentagrams, and tonight, he's obtained the decisive ingredient he needs to make his plans a reality: the bubonic plague sample. Saying the complex, incomprehensible words of a spell he'd memorized, Humphrey Bingham produces the vial and carefully pours it across the apocalyptic death metal sword. It glows and tingles, radiating with pure power, and Humphrey finds himself giggling with uncontrollable glee. He imagines scenes from the Book of Revelation, his favorite part of the New Testament, where Satan rises, and the war between him and God destroys and later remakes the earth. He imagines his mighty sword as an agent of almost heavenly power, dealing brutal judgment on the evil and the weak. Back in reality, Humphrey's insane dream might just be coming true, but in an even grander manner than he'd imagined. The apocalyptic death metal sword floats off of its stand, but it isn't alone. 3 other smaller swords from his collection also rise up, the weapons that had been practiced for all of his experiments. It seems they'd been a success. A terrible, rousing success. But Humphrey's dreams quickly turn into a nightmare as the enchanted swords begin to fight each other. But it isn't some free-for-all battle royale. All the smaller swords are teaming up against the apocalyptic death metal sword, and the smaller swords are losing as the wildly flailing death sword slashes them into tiny fragments of metal. It is an act of rampant swordicide, and Humphrey can only stare on in horror. Though the rampage is nowhere near over, when the lesser of the swords are no more, the apocalyptic death metal sword flails insanely as though battling invisible monsters. Already it's far beyond Humphrey Bingham's control, but there is a method to this madness, a method that Humphrey himself is literally unable to see. The apocalyptic death metal sword is so dedicated to the grand mission of destroying life that even bacteria cannot escape its stainless steel wrath. On a microscopic level, every swing cleanly cuts one of the microscopic life forms in half. This terrifying weapon truly does not plan on letting any of its potential victims escape, up to and including the unfortunate Humphrey Bingham himself. Before he's even had time to scream and run, the sword turns on him. It flies in his direction at Mach 4 speed and unleashes an impossible flurry of slashes. By the time it's done, there's literally nothing left. Not even blood, just an empty room full of broken swords, where the creator of this apocalyptic weapon has been cleaved into oblivion on the atomic level. But the sword is not done. It slashes through the door and heads out into the wider world, ready to pursue its deadly mission. It isn't long until researchers at a local Foundation containment site catch wind of something strange going on in the city. They intercept some frantic police chatter about officers fighting off a sword. No, not a person holding a sword, just a sword. Rather than just assume it's some kind of strange police incident, like the time those 2 on-duty cops avoided investigating a robbery to get a Snorlax on Pokemon Go, the site director quickly dispatches a heavily armed mobile task force. On the scene, it is a complete bloodbath. Officers and civilians lay dead in the streets, as the sword continues to fly around at impossible speed. What had initially been several squad cars worth of responding officers had been reduced to a mere handful of scared stragglers. What they've seen today would completely rewrite their understanding of reality, even if it wasn't actively murdering their coworkers and trying to murder them too. In the brief periods where the apocalyptic death metal sword isn't cutting down cops and civilians, it is continuing to flail madly through the air, slicing more insects and microscopic beings. Seemingly nothing can stop its rampage. And that's when the mobile task force helicopter arrives, along with 2 ground units in armored tactical vehicles for support. It's the kind of precautions you can expect when the SCP Foundation isn't entirely sure what they're up against. And little do they know, they're going to need all of them if they want any hope of surviving and defeating the apocalyptic death metal sword. But they're going to lose a lot of good men before then. MTF troopers start rappelling down from the helicopter, wielding advanced tactical assault rifles. They're able to lock on to the diabolical MalO ninja blade and open fire, hitting it with a hail of armor-piercing bullets. but those bullets resoundingly fail to pierce whatever anomalous armor maintains the apocalyptic death metal sword's structural integrity. The bullets ricochet off, making sounds like popcorn kernels rattling around in a tin can. The blade's counteroffensive would be a lot more effective. It locks on to the most dangerous target first, perhaps out of pure bad luck on the part of the MTF squads, the helicopter pilot. The sword flies for him faster than he could possibly move his vehicle out of its path. It skewers the cockpit, traveling straight through his chest and out the other side of the helicopter. The vehicle consequently spins out and explodes, torpedoing its burning carcass down onto the street below. Things are starting to get interesting. As the other operatives pile out of the ground vehicles and start firing on the flash of deadly purple steel, the massacre continues. The sword flying through Foundation tactical armor like Play-Doh. Their bullets can't harm the device or even really slow it down. A frightening thought passes through the minds of one of the operatives. If this thing is left unchecked for long enough, it could blossom into an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. There is no follow-up thought, though, because the sword passed through his mind moments afterwards, leaving him cold and dead on the ground. As the battle rages on, victory clearly on the side of the apocalyptic death metal sword, the eggheads back at the nearest Foundation containment site are screaming to think up of a contingency plan. An entity wielding a weapon is easily enough to kill or at least disable, but a weapon without an entity that still keeps on attacking feels almost impossible. They're desperately trying to collect information about the anomalous item from the field, but anytime one of the operatives is able to radio back, they're killed by the sword before they can impart any useful information. All that's left to try is the nuclear option. Thankfully, not literally. When conventional teams fail, they have certain experimental mobile task forces, namely Mobile Task Force Omega-7 Pandora's Box, and one particular member of that team who has expertise in that area, SCP-076-2, Abel, the Immortal Warrior. Years before the incident of mass killing that would cause the team to be disbanded, while the apocalyptic death metal sword did its thing, the rest of the team was being dispatched to fetch Abel out of cold storage. The second that this terrifying tattooed warrior is told that he'll be up against another blade, he's chomping at the bit. He's dragged into a high-speed helicopter and taken to the scene as quickly as possible, fitted with an earpiece so he can tell exactly what he learns about the apocalyptic death metal sword over to Mission Command. Abel agreed on the condition that he could go all out on his enemy. For once, his handlers didn't mind granting him that permission. After all, nobody was even really sure if it was possible to hurt an enemy like this. About an hour into the rampage, Abel arrives, touching down on the concrete so hard that it buckles beneath his feet. He sees the sword floating there, hideous and garish even by his standards. Is his opponent invisible? It doesn't matter. He'll slay them all the same. He produces two of his obsidian swords and charges in, as the sword seems to notice his presence and flies towards him at incredible speeds. It takes his truly superlative reflexes along with his considerable strength to parry the weapon at the decisive minute before it can pierce his wretched heart. It's so much faster than he expected. He's almost impressed. The blade does not wait. It circles and strikes him again as he deflects and strikes at it with his own swords. And then, something impossible happens. His swords break. This hideous purple blade has sliced clean through them, causing them to fall onto the floor in multiple black pieces. This is impossible. How could this blade have bested his own? Over his earpiece, his handlers ask him for information on the blade, anything they can use. Abel says that the weapon doesn't make sense. It has the quality of mere steel, but it was somehow unbreakable. That is all the handlers need to hear. They begin immediately putting their contingency measures into place. They just need Abel to buy them a little more time. Will he be able to give the apocalyptic death metal sword a good enough fight? The battle is strangely one of the toughest he's ever faced. His opponent feels no pain, no fear. It doesn't even think or feel. It attacks and kills on pure instinct. Every time he pulls out a new weapon, an axe, a sword, a warhammer, a chainsaw, it's already upon him, slashing away with unimaginable speed and ferocity. It matches his own, as every parry is met with a perfect counter parry. He's now getting to grips with the fact that his opponent isn't holding a weapon. His opponent is a weapon, but he still refuses to let this be an easy fight. He summons a huge obsidian broadsword from the space between spaces and lunges in, clashing blades with the edges of the apocalyptic death metal sword. He feels its strength and its speed, its desire to deal death to everything. It was pure, it was glorious. When the Foundation reinforcements arrive, Abel is dead. Don't worry, he'll get better, with the apocalyptic death metal sword sticking out of his chest. After finding out that the sword is made of steel, the Foundation operatives were able to devise a powerful electromagnet, one capable of getting this unruly weapon of mass destruction under some semblance of control. With the sword and Abel's body retrieved, this supernatural weapon, now labeled SCP-3749, is placed inside a vacuum chamber, completely sterilized. In that scenario, the weapon simply shook around on the floor, a shadow of its terrifying former self. Without even bacteria to destroy, it can only turn on itself and lay there in the dark. Another dangerous anomaly secured, contained, and soon to be protected. A textbook case for the Foundation's central mission. These days, SCP-3749 sits inside a fitted, hermetically sealed chamber full of kinetic gel, designed to suppress its constant urge to slash and stab any and all life. If ever that seal is broken, we just hope you're nearby, or in the very brief period you'll still be alive, you may learn firsthand what it feels like to be sushi. In that regard, the miserable legacy of Humphrey Bingham is, unlike the man himself, alive and well. The year was 2015. Louis, Joseph, and Sydney were like a lot of kids their age, which is to say, 11 years old. They secretly stay up past their bedtime watching scary videos on the internet when their moms and dads think they're sleeping. They go to school every day and daydream about all the fun things they're going to do when that school bell finally rings at the end of the day. And of course, they play a lot, and we mean a lot, of Minecraft. Whenever they're not at school, hanging out at the local park and filming goofy TikTok videos, or watching those aforementioned scary videos on the internet, there's a good chance that they'll be online together, logging a few extra hours building bases, digging big holes, or playing survival mode, and seeing how long they can last against the onslaught of mobs. But there's one particular pursuit they have while playing Minecraft together that takes up the majority of their playtime. One quixotic quest that drives them forward, despite all the naysayers and doubters, tracking down and finding the legendary Minecraft creepypasta entity, Herobrine. For those who weren't around on the internet back then, creepypastas like Herobrine were all the rage. Like any video game, the new frontier of Minecraft with all of its procedurally generated landscapes felt like it held new mysteries, and mysteries are equal parts exciting and frightening. After all, who really knows what's going on behind a closed door? Herobrine was a Minecraft-specific little urban legend. Stories told of a default Minecraft skin with eerily white eyes manifesting in the game, even in solo matches, and terrorizing players. One internet sleuth who looked into the mystery of Herobrine claimed it to be the haunted soul of the dead brother of Minecraft's creator, Marcus Persson, also known as Notch. In the years since the legend first started, Notch himself has come forward and disavowed the claim, saying that, in fact, he didn't even have a brother and never had, so the rumors were completely baseless. But as we here at the SCP Foundation know, the truth has never gotten in the way of a good story. So Louis, Joseph, and Sydney were happy to remain believers as long as they could keep having fun chasing alleged digital ghosts. How could any of these boys know that in the midst of their fun, they'd run into a real monster amidst Minecraft's blocky vistas? It was a school night like any other when they made that first fateful expedition. It was 7:15 p.m., and the boys were all in their shared server. Louis had chicken tenders, Joseph had chicken nuggets, and Sydney, who'd eaten his dinner earlier than the others, was snacking on a pack of Skittles. They'd all outfitted their characters with full diamond armor, with diamond swords to match, because Joseph had somehow convinced the others that diamonds were ghost-proof. He read it on the internet, he claimed. Together, the three boys had made themselves an impressive Minecraft castle to be the base of their Herobrine hunting operations. A safe haven surrounded by high stone walls and mob-repelling torches to keep them safe if ever they got a little too spooked while playing. Though playing was perhaps too mild a word for it. In the minds of these three boys, they were doing extremely important investigative work. After all, if they managed to actually find Herobrine themselves, they would be creepypasta legends. And wouldn't that be worth all the hours upon hours of rigorous mining and crafting? They'd been methodical in their search, scoping out different corners of the map and canvassing them together, searching high and low, and then marking said area off their checklist. It was a level of consideration and thought that their parents and teachers had long wished the boys would put into their home or schoolwork. But alas, seeing as none of the homework was find Herobrine, they really weren't that interested. Today, they were searching an area deep in the misty forests in the dead of night. They fought off a few spiders and sword-wielding skeletons, thankfully no creepers, aw man, and kept foraging on into the darkness.
It's so creepy out here, Lewis said over his headset. Why do we have to come out here at night? It's way more dangerous with all the mobs. The night is like the perfect time for ghosts, Sydney retorted. You think a ghost is gonna start hanging around in the middle of the day? No way, it's gotta be at night, man.
And Lewis simply could not argue with such incredibly sound logic. They forged on, doing their typical methodical search for any phenomenon that one might generously be able to describe as supernatural. So you can only imagine the excitement coursing through them when Joseph discovered a strange, dark cave that looked as though it had no business being there. While each held their own private reservations, they all knew what they needed to do: go inside and investigate. As they entered the cave, a few strange realizations occurred to them, such as the fact that there were seemingly no mobs down here. A cave in the dead of night? Surely there should be some enemies, right? Plus, the typical lighting implements, like torches and lanterns, didn't seem to offer the same kind of illumination that they normally would. It was almost like the darkness was more oppressive here, more tangible. There was undeniably something eerie about the whole setup. That much couldn't be denied.
You guys see anything? Lewis asked.
No, Joseph said, sounding oddly cautious, as though he sensed something strange was on the horizon, something that perhaps these boys shouldn't see.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything either,
Sydney chimed in.
Maybe we should.
Joseph screamed, and the two others turned their Minecraft avatars to look at him. Joseph's character had bumped into something, some stranger in the cave. An NPC design that looked oddly realistic for something inhabiting the purposefully lo-fi blocky world of Minecraft. It seemed to have a dark, furry body, with a canid skull-like face bearing a pair of milky white eyes that seemed to stare off into nothingness. Was this another mob? Maybe something added in the latest patch? If so, why wasn't it attacking?
What is that thing?
Lewis asked over his headset.
I don't know,
Joseph replied.
It's so creepy though.
Suddenly, a message appeared on the screen, as though it had been typed and sent by another player, a player with the username MalO. The message read, "Hey, that isn't very nice. You shouldn't judge on appearances, kid." That certainly gave them pause. So many things about this didn't make sense. It had all the hallmarks of an NPC, but apparently it understood their voices and could send messages. It clearly wasn't actually another player in a conventional sense, but it didn't attack like your typical mob. None of the boys could really make sense of what they were dealing with here.
Are you a hacker?
Sydney asked. No, MalO typed back. I'm just lonely and a long way from home. It's nice to have your company down here, though. I don't get visitors often.
Have you heard of Herobrine?
Lewis asked. MalO typed back. Is he a friend of yours? You should introduce him to me. I love making new friends. The three boys were, in some regards, rather mature and polite for their ages, and so remained civil with this bizarre, mysterious figure, who was curious and inquisitive, asking them questions about their school lives and their friends. It did seem earnestly happy for their company, so it didn't give any of them the sense that it was a threat. As night drew on and the boys' respective parents told them it was time to log off and get some shut-eye, MalO finally typed, "I've really enjoyed hanging out with you kids. Come back and visit me again tomorrow. If you don't, I'll come visit you instead." None of the kids picked up on the probably rather obvious stranger danger vibes of this message, and instead they went to bed, excited and curious. The next day, they met up on the playground for a kind of state of the union on the strange phenomenon they had encountered the night before.
Do you think it has anything to do with Herobrine?
Lewis asked. Forget Herobrine, Sydney replied, eliciting gasps from the two others.
All the other people have Herobrine. We have something better. Something only we've discovered. We've got MalO.
Later that night, Joseph, who was probably the most studious of the group, tried to do a little background research on MalO. Everything seemed to turn up dead ends, aside from one slightly shady-looking app called MalO version 1.0.0. Its description read, "Never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again. MalO is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but just after a few hours of MalO, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more MalO will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy." Weird. So unless the thing they encountered on Minecraft was some kind of weird viral marketing campaign for the app, it was probably just a coincidence. Maybe it was a popular character from Japan or something. Either way, for the next several days, the boys honored their promise. They'd visit MalO in the cave every night and chat, trying to tactfully get more information out of it. Though the best they could get on the entity's origin was the cryptic statement, "I'm not usually here, but everyone wants a vacation once in a while, don't they? We can't just spend our whole life on a phone." They'd become so acclimated to MalO over the days that they forgot what the entity had said to them the very first day they met. "Come back and visit me again tomorrow. If you don't, I'll come visit you instead." But on the day that they didn't come and visit MalO, because Miss Grayson had sent a particularly challenging piece of English homework, they received a frightening reminder. That very night, they all started receiving strange texts on their phones. As you can probably expect, they were all photographs, each and every one depicting some regular haunt that the boys all liked to frequent, with one addition. MalO's grinning skull face hiding somewhere in the image, like some kind of demented parody of Where's Waldo. The strangeness of this new development left all the boys shaken, and they hopped back onto Minecraft as quickly as possible to go find and talk to MalO in its cave. However, this time the cave was empty, and MalO was nowhere to be seen. But the text still didn't stop. They'd come in so frequently, with MalO getting closer to home, literally in each one. The boys thought about telling their parents, but would their parents believe them? They'd probably lump MalO in with the same tall tales of childhood imagination as Herobrine, and write it off as bored kids playing a prank, even though in this case, it was anything but. More photos arrived. In these ones, MalO was right outside each of the children's homes, lurking, watching. In some of the photos, they could see themselves in the windows, going about their evening business, having no idea of the creature lurking just outside. None of the boys felt like playing Minecraft that night. It wasn't fun anymore. Instead, they shut themselves up in their rooms, closed and locked their windows, and pulled down the blinds, after checking under the beds with flashlights, of course. But still more photos came in, all depicting MalO getting closer and closer and closer. Right about the time they were wondering whether the scratching on the outside of their bedroom door was real or just a figment of their imagination, another dark irony had occurred to them. All this time trying to find something supernatural, and in the very end, something supernatural had instead found them. Want an anomaly of your own? Check out scpswag.com for high-quality SCP merch.
Step right up, folks. We've got all kinds of refreshing and tasty treats here for you today. Popcorn, peanuts, cotton candy, and even fried dough. Yes, sirree, here at SCP Explained, we're offering the top-of-the-line anomalous delectable foodstuffs for all your circus-themed fun-time occasions. And that's because today, yes, today, on this YouTube platform, our infamous acronym doesn't stand for Secure, Contain, Protect. It stands for Sweet Confectionery Products. And let me tell you, dear viewer, the SCP we're looking at today just might be the most decadent, durable, and dangerous dessert that's ever desired to be devoured. We're talking about SCP-3077, or as they are better known, the Sugar Golems. These little fellas are safe class and also totally harmless, so long as you take the proper precautions. What's the matter, don't you believe me? Don't you think it's nice of us to cover a safe SCP now and again? And hey now, why all this dull talk about rules and regulations in the first place? You don't go out to the carnival to not take wild and exciting risks. Every spinny, twirly, and whirly ride on the fairgrounds comes with a statistically higher chance of a tragic mishap befalling you and any other thrill seekers around you. But we all take that chance anyway for the extraordinary rush of the experience. And such is the wacky and wonderful ways of our adorable and questionably edible chums, the sugar golems. Don't you just love them, folks? Ain't they a sight for sore eyes and a pang for sweet teeth? Well, we're only just getting started. The best is yet to come, ladies and non-ladies. So pull up a chair and be sure to watch what we've got in store. You can make like a piece of old candy and stick around. Now that's a knee slapper, ain't it? Sit back, relax, and make sure to enjoy the show. You should also subscribe to SCP Explained if you'd like to continue to be entertained. Hey, that rhymed! What do you know? I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Ha! How droll. While SCP-3077 refers to the anomalous substance contained in Site-81, the semi-humanoid instances, which are nicknamed sugar golems, are themselves an animate and independent byproduct that naturally spawns from SCP-3077 when it is allowed to exist outside of containment procedures. The most important of these containment procedures being that SCP-3077 must remain at a constant temperature of well below its freezing point, and only be stored in containers full to capacity, lest its aforementioned byproducts attempt to breach containment. The total volume of SCP-3077 within the cryogenic containment unit equals almost 2,200 liters, and it is believed to be the only known quantity of the anomalous substance in existence. For the sake of clarity in distinguishing between SCP-3077 and its byproducts, we'll be referring to the main object contained by the Foundation as SCP-3077, while the gooey little guys who we know to spontaneously split off from the source of SCP-3077 will be regarded as SCP-3077-1. As mentioned before, SCP-3077-1 instances have been affectionately dubbed the Sugar Golems. Every instance of SCP-3077-1 resembles an approximately 1 meter tall, gaunt humanoid, composed of a pure sugar-derived substance commonly known as treacle. And that's molasses for all y'all yeehaw cowboys over there in the US of A. If you've ever played the classic board game Candyland, you'll have some idea of what an individual instance of SCP-3077 looks like from the beloved and often remembered character of Gloppy, who lives in the molasses swamp section of the board and is also fittingly made out of molasses himself. Yes, indeed, Gloppy is truly a delight for a weary Candyland player to meet. What did you say? Are you folks too young to know about Candyland? Well, that factoid certainly makes this narrator feel pretty old. Then again, I am taking on the mannerisms and attire of an old-fashioned carnival barker, so I suppose a bit of novel antiquity comes with the territory. Regardless, the golems are each composed of roughly 7 liters of sweet, syrupy goodness. And very much like everyone's favorite character, Gloppy, they all lack defined lower bodies and can all emote through crude yet oddly endearing vocalizations in the place of intelligible speech. While their facial features are simplistic and misshapen, the contours of concave eyes and gaping mouth are usually present. The exact number of these eyes and mouths is subject to variation, much like the color of the board spaces in a wonderful, wholesome family game of Candyland. While each SCP-3077-1 instance is around the same size, the body proportions and overall shape of each instance are rather fluid, pun fully intended. Some possess oversized arms or bulbous heads, while others might be conjoined to an adjacent sugar golem, as if to show that the two are inseparable as a pair of best buddies. Or, as some others might put it, a couple of BFFFs, best friends for fancy frolicking. They really are quite friendly looking, aren't they? And aren't they? They sure are. For the only thing that these sugary sweet SCP instances want is to be in the company of human beings just like you. Yes, you! Who else would I be talking to? It's a hard life for this worn-down Connie, let me tell you. These little sugar golems love what they do and do what they love. But that doesn't mean that it's time for fun and games. Even though SCP-3077-1 instances want to hang around human beings, they don't tend to stop at hey and hello or whatever those appropriate greetings sound like when they are being gurgled by a diminutive molten sugar monster. Things can get out of hand real fast, just like an orange cream popsicle melting in the sun of a late summer's day. Now listen up. It's important that you pay attention to what I say next. I'm about to book learn you about what to do if an instance of SCP-3077-1 enters your personal space. The results of prolonged contact with this SCP can end badly if you're not careful. I'm not going to sugarcoat any of the chewy details of your grisly fate, and I promise that it won't be a cakewalk. So don't be a nerd and listen up. Yes, that's right, I called you a nerd. You know, like Nerds, the candy. How do you folks seriously not know Nerds? They were a classic Halloween candy from the Wonka Company, and they were very popular back in the day. Oh, what's that you say? How long ago was it back in the day for me? That's a bit of a rude question, wouldn't you say? Oh, I oughta. Won't you go ahead and knock it off with the wise guy questions? What are you, a pack of smarties? Ha ha! I said smarties, get it? It's just like the... never mind. Let's just move on to the explanation of how to survive a close encounter with this SCP. That was the main reason you came all this way to this here educational and entertaining video presentation after all. To pick up where I left off, instances of SCP-3077-1 have a tendency to seek out nearby human life. The reason for doing so is surprisingly simple and alarmingly, well, alarming. These sticky saccharine simulacra are solely set on slithering into people's mouths for the purposes of gaining total control of their bodies. Yes, you heard that right. Believe it or not, the same anomalous property which animates the sugar golem's treacle bodies is apparently capable of overriding the human nervous system from the inside. And that's no joke, folks. While these tasty treats might sound sweet to eat, you'll be a puppet of meat from your head to your feet if you don't complete the tasks I entreat. If an instance of SCP-3077-1 attempts to enter your mouth, you must remember first and foremost to keep your trap shut, blocking it with a mask or similar article of clothing if need be. Next, you must use your limbs and all available implements to batter the attacking golem away, while you do your best to keep a distance of at least arm's reach between yourself and the instance. It should come as a relief to all rational people that SCP-3077-1 instances are severely limited in their physical capabilities, and an adult human of average fitness can easily hold one off if they know what to expect. The tricky part comes from the amorphous properties of the instance's viscous treacle bodies, as well as their anomalous ability to regenerate from any physical trauma. The only way to permanently destroy an instance of SCP-3077-1 is to expose it to temperatures above its melting point, which for you sticklers out there is approximately 176 degrees Celsius. The most effective weapons against SCP-3077-1 instances include firebombs, flamethrowers, and your run-of-the-mill convection ovens. If it is at all possible to contain the instance within a sealed vessel such as a large Tupperware or wooden barrel, then you ought to do whatever you can to prevent the candy creeps from running amok. While ordinary below-zero temperatures are unable to destroy the anomalous treacle of SCP-3077, instances of SCP-3077-1 can effectively be slowed down or stopped completely if you put them on ice. Whether it's the hot foot or the cold shoulder, some form of extreme temperature should always be weaponized when defending oneself from an SCP-3077-1 instance. Any attempt to crush or smash an SCP-3077-1 instance will only result in the bad bonbon breaking apart and reforming into several more belligerent bite-sized blighters. A human under siege by the sugar golems might find themselves quickly outnumbered if they foolishly attempt to use a melee weapon against the anomalies. Basically, it's like a more delicious version of the popular arcade video game Asteroids. No? I guess that reference was from before even my time. At any rate, instances of SCP-3077-1 are difficult to destroy without access to heat or freezing. The tendency of the molasses menaces to increase in number is made even worse because of the fact that any amount of SCP-3077 outside of containment can generate a nearly infinite number of SCP-3077-1. While even an army of SCP-3077-1 instances is far weaker than an equivalent pack of hunting animals, the ability to continuously multiply and physiology that doesn't experience the consequences of fatigue means that, given enough time, these sugar golems can outlast any amount of human resistance until they roll over their preferred prey like a slow, insurmountable, syrupy tsunami of surrender! Seriously scary stuff, some would say. But what happens next is the real kicker, folks. Mind this ballyhoo's somber spiel. If an instance of SCP-3077-1 manages to, against all odds, clamber its way into a human chatterbox and hijack the poor sap's nervous system, the victim is immediately classified as SCP-3077-2. SCP-3077-2 instances are easily distinguished from unaffected humans on sight alone. Dark tendrils of SCP-3077 can be seen visibly moving beneath the skin, and often emerge from the mouth to crisscross the instance's face, like makeup, the world's most disturbing circus clown. That's not all! After the tragic treacly transformation takes place, the movements exhibited by the instance of SCP-3077-2 will become crooked and jerky like a marionette puppeteered by a frustrated chimpanzee. During this time, the instance remains fully conscious, retaining whatever cognitive faculties it has possessed previous to its classification, but it is unable to attempt speech or exert autonomy over its own actions. This fun fact was discovered by studying the EEG recordings of several SCP-3077-2 instances, and is brought to you by the United Guild of the Existentially Terrified. If an instance of SCP-3077-2 happens to wander its way into the vicinity of any humans that haven't succumbed to the process of consuming SCP-3077-1, it will proceed to put on a jaunty performance for its newfound audience. This peculiar display involves clumsy efforts at dance choreography and the throaty singing of unsettling atonal melodies that would make your annoying cousin's road trip songs sound like they're in tune. These awkward performances continue until the audience departs from the view of SCP-3077-2 instance, or the instance expires. This confirms that the point of the gesture is to entertain, as without an audience, the SCP-3077-2 instance is not compelled to make any noises of its own accord, and in general doesn't do anything other than move around aimlessly. In the event that any number of SCP-3077-1 instances escapes from containment and causes the creation of SCP-3077-2, members of the Mobile Task Force are instructed to never stray from the line of sight of a currently performing SCP-3077-2 instance, and to approach it steadily, before restraining the instance while causing minimal harm to the body. SCP-3077-2 instances can be useful for running further tests on the anomalous properties of SCP-3077, and there are simple procedures that allow an instance to be kept alive indefinitely in containment. Any damage sustained during capture can severely hamper the efficiency of these life-sustaining procedures. The worst-case scenario is that an SCP-3077-2 instance expires before being securely contained, as this will cause the SCP-3077-1 instance to emerge from its host and resume its relentless attack on all nearby humans. It is far easier to simply deal with SCP-3077-2 instances accordingly, and this is because SCP-3077-2 only ever attempts to continue the performance and possesses neither the intention nor the capacity for retaliation. If it is deemed necessary for the effectiveness of a recapture effort, it can be permissible for the Mobile Task Force to allow instances of SCP-3077-1 outside of containing to find purchase within SCP-3077-2 to increase the ease of containment and lessen the risk of Foundation personnel being affected. The performances of SCP-3077-2 instances are rarely physically intensive enough to make capture too difficult, but it can be said that the whimsical antics of these affected humans are anything but predictable. During some rare and special performances, and if the SCP-3077-1 instance in control of SCP-3077-2 instance is feeling especially daring, it may try to show off an array of woefully inadequate acrobatic skills. Front flips that are more like belly flops, back flips that could be mistaken for pratfalls, and the sort of tightrope and trapeze acts that are better left to the imagination. In lieu of prior incidents, the Foundation strongly advises that if for any reason an instance of SCP-3077-2 must exist in containment, it must always be prevented from being at an altitude of more than 6 feet from the surface of the floor, especially if any humans it would perceive as an audience are located directly beneath where its performance would take place. Regarding the creation of further instances of SCP-3077-2, requests from any level of Foundation personnel at Site-81 or elsewhere must be granted permission to proceed by SCP-3077's head researcher, because of the horrific implications of what happens to the still-aware human mind while the body is affected by SCP-3077-1. This process is only to be approved for use on D-Class personnel. That's right! And even then, in the event that all the rigmarole of the paperwork goes through, it is not acceptable to create an instance of SCP-3077-2 merely for the purpose of providing live entertainment to fellow researchers. After all, not a single one of us should be quick to forget the grotesque and highly regrettable spectacle that was Dr. Dietz's deplorable D-Class dancers. Every researcher involved with that ethical nightmare was reprimanded severely, and the colorful novelty costumes and jangling bells that all former D-Class personnel were made to wear after being reclassified to SCP-3077-2 have been permanently confiscated. Let the cotton candy machine and peanut dispenser located just outside the containment unit of SCP-3077 serve as a stern reminder that there's a time and place for monkey shines and tomfoolery, and sometimes, yes, even now and then, a highly secure Foundation facility is neither the right place nor the right time. In case you haven't picked up on it, there are very few practical applications of SCP-3077 due to the fact that its status as a food dish is negated by the consequences of consumption. The main reason for tests to be administered on SCP-3077-2 instances is to discover if there is a safe method of extracting an SCP-3077-1 instance from the body of its host without causing the expiration of the original human. Unfortunately, due to a persistent lack of success, the experiments have been discontinued indefinitely. But that just won't do. How else are we supposed to know if these things actually taste as good as they look? I won't rest until everyone is able to harmlessly ingest a sugar golem of their very own. I might be old-fashioned, but to me, the safe object class isn't just a designation, it's an invitation. I ought to be completely okay doing whatever I like around a safe object because it's safe. That word should actually mean something. Ding, dang, darn it. And I don't mean that in the sense that the SCP Foundation uses it, meaning an anomaly that doesn't present an active threat to containment efforts. And more importantly, there aren't that many anomalies that are also delicious candy. And I want to eat this one. Sorry, I lost my cool a bit there. I just have a sweet tooth, and my brain is constantly drifting back to my nostalgic childhood memories of playing Candyland with my family. That was before they all decided that they wanted nothing to do with me because I became so obsessed with dressing up like a carnival barker that I drove away everyone who's ever cared about me. Other than that, my job here at the Foundation explaining confectionery SCPs is the only thing I have left in my sad, sad life. Some days I feel less like Gloppy and more like a real Lord Licorice. In hard times like these, a fellow could really use some entertainment to cheer himself up. Wait, just a flea-jumping moment! What was that? What's the big idea? How did these escaped instances of SCP-3077-2 get in here? They're all supposed to be in safe containment a few floors down! Did somebody else from the research team let them in here because they knew I was in costume standing in front of a pretend fairground set? That's in pretty poor taste, don't you think? Pun very much intended. I should probably report it to the head researcher. That would be the ethical, reasonable thing to do. Then again, look at them go! Those are sure some hilarious dances. I'm definitely seeing a snappy attempt at doing the Charleston. A classic. And is that one doing the worm, or is it just kind of flopping on the floor? I think one of these instances knows about that Fortnite stuff all the kids are into these days, but I'm not sure if the human element or the golem that decides what dances it knows. Either way, this was exactly what I needed to feel so much better. For once, it feels like I'm actually at a carnival instead of just pretending to be at one now. This is the greatest performance I've ever seen in all my years, which you can be sure that there have been a lot of.
In 1961, the SCP Foundation discovered a town that was completely devoid of all life. Not long before their arrival, Darrington, North Carolina had been a community with high aspirations, a deeply religious township of devout Christians, many of whom were seeking greater prosperity from their lives. But now their home was a ghost town, with no sign of any prior Darrington resident to be found. Where in the hell had they all gone? It hardly seemed like the population of an entire town would all simultaneously decide to up sticks and leave to pastures new. But then again, maybe the citizens of Darrington hadn't left at all. Perhaps they weren't even really still human and had taken up residence somewhere much darker, like underground. This is the story of one of the earliest known instances of a phenomenon now known under the designation of SCP-3089, or to use its alternative name, that old-time religion. When the SCP Foundation arrived in a desolate Darrington to find the townsfolk had all vanished, they immediately began an investigation into the exact hows and whys, the answers to what exactly had happened here. After all, while not a huge place, Darrington was home to nearly 1,000 residents, and that many people don't just disappear, if they even had disappeared and weren't just dormant. But what the Foundation uncovered was a gruesome discovery that led them to not only demolishing the entire North Carolinian town, but purchasing all the land around it to keep the area under permanent observation. Prior to the demolition, however, the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing had been one of the oldest buildings in Darrington, much like most town churches. And it was while searching the offices of this church that the Foundation cleanup crews discovered their first piece of evidence, the initial clue about what had happened to this deserted town. They recovered a series of cassette tapes, each with a recording of sermons that had been given within the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing. These were all delivered by one Pastor Bartholomew Jenner, the first having been recorded on August 17th of 1959, 2 years earlier.
My friends, I want to talk to you about what the Bible offers tonight.
Pastor Jenner began in the first of these recordings.
I want to talk to you about what you are owed. I want to talk to those of you who are struggling right now. To those of you who have hardship and pain. Maybe you've heard that the Bible only nourishes the spirit, that God only provides for our immortal souls. Well, my friends, I'm here to tell you that this is simply not true.
Pastor Bartholomew Jenner seemed to be focused on the discussion of very real, relatable problems. After all, what person hasn't felt unsatisfied with their life at one point or another? And this was apparently no different for the people of Darrington.
Many of you can think of places in your lives where you have not yet risen, where you are not yet victorious. Marriage, finances, health. But do not fret, my friends, God wants you to rise. He has cleared a path for you. It is one littered with his earthly treasures. To claim them, you only need to shed your old selves and be reborn.
The pastor was merely using the shared faith of the township to help reaffirm that their struggles were not the be-all end-all of their lives. Or at least, that's how it first appeared. But the religious practices taking place in this first recording would soon take a bizarre turn, making it clear there was something far more sinister, even cult-like, going on in the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing.
Now, if you would, some of the ladies from the mayor's office were kind enough to collect these cicada shells. Pass along, each of you take one. Yes, the children too. Be careful, very careful. They are fragile. Each of you take one and hold it in your left hand. Yes, the left hand, not the right. Your left.
The shells of dead cicadas hardly seemed like common fare for a sermon like this. Although as the recording continued, it was easy to understand that Pastor Jenner intended these discarded insect carapaces to be something of a metaphor, even if they were pretty gross, especially to some of the younger members of his congregation. He explained to the Darrington residents that these cicada shells were meant to be symbolic of whatever hardship the citizens were currently struggling with in their lives, whether it was work, a marriage, or an ill family member. Then came the next part of this unorthodox practice. The pastor instructed everyone in the congregation to picture themselves holding their biggest problem in their left hand.
Now I want you to squeeze your left hand. Squeeze it into a fist. Feel that problem cracking like old dried out paper. Feel it crumble to dust.
Jenner told them, and the residents of Darrington did so, crushing the cicada shells until there was nothing left.
Everyone open your eyes. Don't you feel better? Stronger. This is what is offered. Our hardships are like the shell. We shall cast them aside even as they crumble. God has cleared a path.
Needless to say, the Foundation agents that recovered the tapes of Pastor Jenner's odd sermons weren't exactly sure what to make of them. And as unusual as they were, the recordings did little to indicate where the townspeople of Darrington, North Carolina had disappeared to. But as they listened further, what they found was even more unsettling than an entire congregation of people crushing cicada shells. In the second recording, dated December 19th of 1959, Pastor Jenner was once again presiding over his congregation. He had just finished quoting a passage from Matthew chapter 25, verse 30, which related to a biblical tale known as the Parable of the Talents. In this story, a master puts his servants in charge of a differently sized portion of his wealth while he is away. then judges them based on whether or not his servants make a profit using his money. The third servant, who had received the least talents, meaning an amount of money, was punished for burying his share in the ground. Cast out into the outer darkness, to face weeping and gnashing of teeth. It was after making mention of this unprofitable servant that Pastor Jenner went on to address even more of the bizarre, almost ritualistic practices he had been introducing to his sermons. Now, some of you have expressed concerns over the new sacraments. A few have even called them sacrilege. And yet, have we not prospered? Have these same naysayers, these same doubting Thomases, not profited from our good works? The pastor declared. I have shown you how to heal the sick with the Lord's Prayer and the blood of an unbaptized child. I have shown you how to see your future in the stemming entrails of a quivering crow. I have shown you the path to glory, but I cannot make you follow this path. I can only show it to you. It is you and you alone who must follow it, who must rise and shed your old self. Shed your old self. The words immediately called to mind the image of the cicadas, insects that discard their outer carapaces and emerge anew, bugs that also burrow into the ground and wait, lying dormant under the earth for years at a time, all before they emerge, rising up again so they can spread. It was becoming clear that Pastor Jenner was certainly deviating further and further from the church's normal religious practices. His bold and blatant descriptions of what sounded like ritualistic sacrifices were shocking enough to hear, speaking of using blood and entrails to bring the town the prosperity it sought. But if that wasn't bad enough, the worst was still yet to come, contained within the third and final recording. Unlike the previous cassettes, most of the sermon from June 7, 1960 was almost completely unintelligible, and without any visual evidence to go along with it. It was hard for the Foundation to make out exactly what was going on. It began with another quote from Matthew, this time chapter 28, verse 6, which made mention of the resurrection of Jesus, that he had risen, and that people should come and see where the Lord lay. Not a metaphor, my friends, Pastor Jenner explained before urging his congregation to join in some kind of formation. Step forward, mothers behind their daughters, fathers behind their sons. Turn to face the recording became unintelligible again after that point, with only a few more words being audible. The pastor seemed to have gathered the townsfolk of Darrington, presumably for some new form of ritual. He encouraged the town's children to close their eyes and pray, before reminding the congregation that God sacrificed the life of his only son, Jesus. Frighteningly, it appeared that Pastor Jenner was implying the adults of Darrington should do the same. One of the next fragments of his sermon that could be deciphered declared, Lamb is slaughtered to feed the lion, the son is slaughtered to feed. Between more and more noise interfering with the recording, Pastor Jenner could be heard saying, The pact is complete. This world shall be our paradise. Before he encouraged his congregation, or those who were left, to dig deep and wait. Then came perhaps the most horrifying part of the tape. The remainder of the recording lasted 30 minutes, comprised of pure static. Or the Foundation agents listening to it assumed at first that it was just interference, but further audio analysis seemed to suggest that the long, continuous mass of hissing wasn't static at all. It was the chittering sound of insects, like the noise made by cicadas. For a time, the incident at Darrington left the Foundation baffled. There seemed to be no clear answer as to what had happened. Not one of the town's residents were anywhere to be found, and on top of that, there were no bodies, no remains of any kind to speak of. If they were dead, there would at least be some kind of trace. And then there were all the questions raised by Pastor Bartholomew Jenner's strange sermons. Why did he seem so focused on enacting rituals? Did any of his methods really benefit the town? And why did he place so much emphasis on cicadas, of all things? Answers were few and far between. Although almost 6 decades after the Foundation discovered the desolate town of Darrington, a new development would come to light. To be more accurate, it was 56 years later. On the 11th of January 2017, a Foundation agent named Daniel Mitchell was patrolling the area that had formerly been Darrington, North Carolina, before the Foundation had demolished all traces of the town. By this point, the SCP Foundation had long thought that they had figured out exactly what SCP-3008 was. They had even encountered it emerging in a number of different forms in both 2007 and 2015. However, it was what Daniel Mitchell happened across during the routine monthly patrol that revealed the horrifying truth. At the outskirts of the area where the town had once been, a series of sinkholes had opened up at some point between the previous monthly check and this one in early 2017. And if you think that these sinkholes caused a disturbance in the earth and uncovered all the bodies of the former residents of Darrington, you'd be wrong. It was far, far stranger. The Foundation conducted a full-scale examination of the sinkholes around the demolished North Carolinian town. And these weren't just a few patches of loose ground that had sunk through. The geological survey the Foundation carried out quickly revealed that these sinkholes led to an extensive network of tunnels underground. They extended several hundred kilometers outwards, practically covering the entire underside of where Darrington had been. The tunnels seemed far too big than any other created by any natural means, but the entire network also appeared too rudimentary, too imperfect to have been carved using any modern excavation technology, like a large drill. Plus, if any equipment like that had been on site, the Foundation would have noticed, as they kept the area monitored. It was almost like something had been burrowing through the ground, only to eventually crawl back up to the surface, resulting in the sinkholes. What's more, the Foundation's geological tests suggested that the network of tunnels was almost 4 decades old. That would have placed the date of their creation about 10 years after the disappearance of everyone in Darrington. Naturally, the Foundation immediately launched a mission to explore more of the tunnels. Before even completing a full sweep of the underground space in its entirety, they had made another discovery. Contained within the tunnels was over a whole ton of organic material that had been mostly preserved without decomposing too much. The SCP Foundation began gathering samples for testing, finding most of this material to be severely desiccated dermis tissue. That is the dense layer of skin beneath the epidermis, and it had all been entirely dried out. But that wasn't all the testing uncovered. According to genetic analysis, the tissue had 2 distinct types of DNA present. The first being easily identified as human genetic material, which made sense. Despite the material lacking in moisture, the dermis tissue didn't match the skin of any other mammal. But then there was the other DNA present. Combined with the expected human DNA was the presence of something else that the Foundation researchers had quite some difficulty finding a match for. Eventually, they determined that this genetic material entangled with the human DNA belonged to the Cicadata montana, better known as the New Forest cicada. Cicadas, again. Cicada DNA mixed with human DNA, discovered in a large network of underground tunnels, all beneath the same town where a pastor had his congregation crush cicada shells in their left hands during one of his sermons. 10 years before the sinkhole incident, the Foundation was alerted to a particular YouTube channel by the name of Kai Sanchez Positively Rich. On the surface, Kai was one of the many online grifters preaching about how easy it was to quickly achieve an obscene amount of wealth by simply believing in yourself. Usually, if not always, these types of people were trying to scam their audience of loyal subscribers into investing in some kind of illicit money-making scheme or any number of other cons, promising their followers easy money that never came. But Kai Sanchez's channel was slightly different, so much so that the Foundation had to contain his entire audience, deeming them to have been affected by SCP-3008. The video that caught the Foundation's attention was an hour-long upload from Kai, entitled 7 Secrets to Ascend the Ladder of Prosperity. There was that word again, prosperity. The same thing Pastor Jenner had promised his entire congregation in Darrington. And the similarities didn't end there. In his video, much like the pastor during his sermons, Kai Sanchez encouraged his audience to visualize their success in order to achieve it. He implied that the human consciousness could impact reality. For example, if his viewers just imagined themselves having a bigger bank account or looking more attractive, then these things would manifest themselves into the real world. One of Kai's secrets to ascend the ladder of prosperity was as follows.
Visualize your ascendance. Reimagine yourself as someone who can reach the top of that ladder. Shed your old identity, tear it off, throw it aside like dead skin. You won't need it, not where you're going.
The resemblance to Pastor Jenner's sermons was uncanny. Kai's video even encouraged that his audience leave scraps out to lure stray cats into their homes, and then, once they had one, to take a knife and Well, you remember what happened in Darrington, but Kai Sanchez made sure to specify,
Remember to hold the knife with your left hand.
Another online community was tagged by the Foundation for similar teachings. This group of insular men were trying to apply the same methodology primarily to attract women. However, they also reasoned it could be used to improve their own financial status and physical stature, all done through visualizing and believing that doing so would make these things improve, that having faith would grant them prosperity. This disturbed community even tried to use bug rattlers to emit frequencies to aid in attracting women. Contained within these rattlers were the preserved remains of cicadas. Male cicadas have tymbals, structures on their outer shell that emit a loud hissing, chittering noise that they often use to find a mate after spending so much time dormant underground before burrowing up to the surface. And if you've been paying attention, you might be able to guess exactly where this is going. SCP-3008 is a phenomenon that occurs within communities of people who are seeking some form of prosperity. Whether that community be a town, a group of like-minded people online, or any other group of collected individuals. The particular type of prosperity these people are all seeking can be anything from spiritual enlightenment to financial success. The SCP Foundation does not yet quite understand exactly how SCP-3008 starts, only that the communities affected by it will attempt to achieve their chosen material success through the application of rituals, like visualizing what they hope to overcome and achieve, and practicing sacrifices. In short, these people have to believe these acts will grant them what they want. They need to be willing to go far enough to do unspeakable things. They need to have faith. Although what they don't realize is, some things can feed on that faith. They can harvest it. Before these communities realize the terrible things that they have done, or who exactly has tricked them into performing these rituals, they'll begin to undergo a horrific transformation process, known as SCP-3089-B. It begins in the chrysalis stage. Members of a community that have been affected by SCP-3089 will experience a declined state of metabolism, now classified as an instance of SCP-3089-A. Their brain activity, heart rate, and body temperature will all begin to lower. Over a period of between 3 and 6 hours, these people will then suffer a change to their epidermis, the outer layer of skin. It starts to harden until it has formed a dense, brittle substance, like a shell. Next comes the second stage of SCP-3089-B, metamorphosis. Internally, SCP-3089-A individuals will develop a number of tetromas, a type of germ cell tumor that can contain several different types of tissue, such as hair, muscle, and bone. During the next 2 or 3 weeks, these tumors will expand and dissolve the person's soft tissue. Then there's the final stage, emergence. An instance of SCP-3089-A will exit its dormant state that began in the initial stage. Once they have awoken, then something exits the outer epidermal shell. It will not communicate. Some will retain remnants of internal organs, such as eyes or lungs. However, these are vestigial, no longer serving any purpose. The brain functions deviate from any normal human patterns. Having completed the process, this thing will attempt to burrow down into the soil via any means at its disposal. An outer shell, digging into the soil. The tunnels underneath Darrington, the genetic material uncovered below. Dermis tissue with 2 types of DNA, a mix of human and cicada. There is something out there. It is preying on people's faith, their longing for prosperity. Then when these communities are presented with someone who can take advantage of that faith, like Pastor Jenner or Kai Sanchez, they find themselves encouraged to push their faith to its furthest limit. And then they are rewarded by becoming something else, something nightmarish. The question is, when they wake up and crawl back out from their tunnels, leaving a sinkhole in their wake, where do these cicada creatures go? Everyone loves a good ghost story. Whether you're crowded around a campfire or watching a YouTube video at 3 a.m., there's something fun and exciting about imagining haunted places plagued by strange noises and apparitions. Part of what makes it so fun is the idea that any place can be haunted, especially if terrible things have happened there. That decrepit old house at the end of your street, that 80-year-old movie theater where no one goes anymore, a park where one too many kids went missing, All it takes is a tragic backstory and a creepy atmosphere, and it's easy to believe that any place could be teeming with restless spirits. So it stands to reason that a place with as many unsolved deaths as the SCP Foundation might have a ghost or two lurking in the shadows. If you've ever suspected that the SCP Foundation might be haunted, well, you'd be right. It began as all good ghost stories do, with a series of frightening, unexplained events. Some time ago, personnel at SCP Foundation Site-30 began to notice strange things happening around the facility. Obviously, at a place like an SCP Foundation containment site, strange is relative, but these events seem to have nothing to do with any of the entities contained at the site. There were unexplained sounds reported in the private quarters of agents and researchers, ranging from whispers to screams from an unseen being. Personnel who approached the D-Class block at the site noticed an immediate drop in temperature, with some employees claiming that they could even see their own breath. Several personnel reported items going missing while they were alone in a room. Most were small and easily misplaced objects like pens and clipboards, but one man said his wallet disappeared, which wouldn't be that strange if it hadn't been securely inside his lab coat. Other personnel would be innocently washing their hands, only to be horrified by the appearance of a bloody figure in a D-Class jumpsuit in the mirror, staring back at them with hatred in its eyes. There were anomalous computer server errors, the feeling of being watched or followed by some menacing invisible force, even the sight of a shadowy silhouette fleeing down corridors and hiding around corners. All of these occurrences were reported to higher-ups at the Foundation, but they were all dismissed. The directorial board of the site insisted that these accounts were likely the result of employees cracking under the immense mental stress of working under such strenuous circumstances. If left alone, they were certain that the reports would stop, but the reports didn't stop, and they soon found out that this was only the beginning. There was an uptick in containment breaches following these initial reports. In total, 12 different entities were released from their containment, and the origin of these breaches could not be identified. Thankfully, the entities were captured and returned to their containment facilities before any casualties could result, but from there, things kept getting worse. Over the course of several months, there were 6 different employee suicides on site. Security footage of the deceased operatives shortly before their deaths showed them acting deeply troubled, engaging in agitated conversation with someone not visible to the camera. At first, it was posited that whoever was upsetting the employees was in a blind spot, but it quickly became clear that the dead employees were being tormented by something invisible. Stories of hauntings were one thing, but now with escaped SCPs and a notable death count, the directorial board decided to mount an official investigation into the unexplained occurrences. It was then that the spirit was officially acknowledged, identified, and reclassified as SCP-4973. SCP-4973 was once a D-Class worker who was used as a guinea pig in 25 different experiments with a variety of entities on site. He was reportedly exposed to multiple unusual and dangerous anomalies, including SCP-158, a large mechanical arm capable of extracting an unidentified substance from any living test subject. Before he was brought on board at SCP Foundation Site-30, he was also known as Gordon Karviakolis Markovich, a man who had been convicted of murder in the 2nd degree after stabbing his wife 24 times in the chest with a kitchen knife. During his incarceration, Markovich was transferred to the custody of the SCP Foundation and placed at Site-30, where he was given a new name, D-10,000. During an experiment involving a redacted entity, D-10,000 was killed, and his remains were disposed of at a nearby waste refinery. It was then only 3 months after his death that the initial reports of ghost activity began. SCP-4973 is regarded as a Class 4 spectral entity, meaning that it is an entity displaying a high degree of aggression and malevolence towards a specific individual or group. In this case, the spirit displays hostility towards a very specific group, the SCP Foundation. Class 4 entities can affect the environment around them, move objects, reduce the temperature in a room, and induce hallucinations in humans that it comes into contact with. These hallucinations are thought to be the cause of the increase in employee suicides that occurred after 4973's first appearance. One of the many ways in which SCP-4973 acted out in what is believed to be an attempt at revenge on the Foundation as a whole, was to somehow gain access to the SCP-net database terminal. This allowed the Spirit to learn about the entities contained at the site, as well as personal details regarding the lives of research, security, and administrative staff working there. This information is likely what allowed 4973 to cause several suspected containment breaches, though the specifics of those breaches have been expunged from official records. 4973 was eventually contained within an apparatus known as the Incorporeal Entity Vacuum Chamber, which is constantly monitored by a team of specialists within MTF-MU-13, affectionately nicknamed Ghostbusters. In order to prevent it from escaping, 4 Harrington Hollow neutralizer wards have been placed at the door to the containment facility. This containment method has been largely effective, though the Spirit had escaped a handful of times and had to be recaptured and placed back into the IEVC. In order to understand SCP-4973 and how it was able to access the database, Dr. Lorraine Casper was assigned to conduct an interview with the Spirit, speaking to it as it was in containment, and a transcript of this interview is available in the official Foundation archives. Dr. Casper began the conversation politely, addressing the SCP as Gordon and asking him how he was. Gordon refused to comply with the round of questioning, going as far as to yell at Dr. Casper until she reminded him that he faced the risk of termination if he refused to answer her questions. Dr. Casper pointed out that the files accessed by 4973 required clearance that the Spirit would have no way of possessing. He responded that he simply waved his hand across the terminal in order to access it, explaining,
It freaked out for a second, then just stopped. I could just move my fingers around the air and the tabs would just roll up. Easy as that.
Dr. Casper asked for clarification, inquiring how he could even do something like that. 4973 continued his explanation.
Beats me. It felt like some attraction, like magnets from afar getting closer and closer. I don't know, something like that.
Finding this answer unsatisfactory, Dr. Casper pushed further, asking for an explanation of SCP-4973's attempts to release dangerous on-site anomalies from containment. This question seemed to stump him, and he claimed not to understand what Dr. Casper meant. She explained that the ID cards of Dr. Yurkov and Dr. Orson were used to open the facilities from which these anomalies escaped. 4973 was shocked that he had even been suspected of this attack, and insisted not to know who Orson or Yurkov even were. All of a sudden, he trailed off. There was silence for a moment, and Dr. Casper began to collect her notes and leave, assuming that the interview was over. Much to her surprise, SCP-4973 began to laugh, a loud, uproarious laugh of complete and utter delight. Casper asked what 4973 was laughing about, and was met with the response,
God, this whole time you and your ghost hunting crew never knew?
He refused to clarify what it was the doctor and her crew had missed, only saying,
God, that look on your face when you find out it's been right under your nose this whole time.
He continued to laugh at Dr. Casper for the remainder of the interview, refusing to answer any further questions or explain any of his comments. Finally, Dr. Casper grew exasperated and left, ending the interview for real this time. Following this perplexing interview, Dr. Casper inexplicably abandoned her post at Site-30. Her supervisors could not reach her, neither could any of the other researchers at the site. No one had heard from her for an entire week, until one day she called Director Eric Riverson of Site-30 on his personal phone line. He recorded the conversation, and a transcript has been included in the file for SCP-4973. Dr. Casper explained to Director Riverson that she had been hiding in her private residence away from the site, and that she no longer considered any part of the site safe. In fact, she suggested that all SCP Foundation sites might be potentially compromised. She explained her conversation with SCP-4973, and the questions it provoked her to ask. If he had not been behind the containment breaches, then who was? He never encountered Dr. Yurkov or Orson in any of the tests administered on him, and Orson wasn't even employed at the Foundation until after 4973's death. Dr. Casper posited that, though the spirit of Gordon was not responsible for the breaches, another spectral force or forces at the site might be. Her hypothesis, that Site-30 was positively infested with the vengeful spirits of Class D employees lost over the years during various experiments. In order to prove her theory, Dr. Casper got her hands on all the experimental equipment used by the department researching spectral anomalies. The general consensus among researchers in this field is that spirits leak out a kind of energy, known as ectoplasm, wherever they go. It has been compared to the skin left behind when a spider or a snake molts, a non-essential portion of the entity that is shed and leaves a residue in areas where they have been. Unsurprisingly, a huge amount of ectoplasm was detected inside of Site-30. The spirits were undetected at first, as many of them were dormant for quite some time. Dormant spirits are spirits that are not aware of their surroundings or the circumstances of their deaths, and they do not emit large quantities of ectoplasm. It is likely that after Gordon was trapped, several of the dormant spirits of Site-30 began to remember what was done to them and manifest in more aggressive ways. Because Gordon was presumed to be the only spirit at the site, their gradual appearance and acting out was either ignored or presumed to be Gordon escaping from containment. After her realization, Dr. Casper identified an additional 5 active spirits at the site and was able to capture and contain one of them. Dr. Casper warned Director Riverson that there were likely far more spirits than just those 5, and it was only a matter of time before they woke up and became active like the others. The large amount of previous containment breaches attributed to simple human error becomes deeply sinister once it is clear that there have been vengeful spirits hiding in plain sight the entire time. As Gordon put it in his interview, they were just under their noses the whole time. Dr. Casper's findings and the story of Site-30 present a troubling possibility. Every SCP Foundation site has used massive amounts of Class D personnel in human experiments with dangerous entities, and the body count at nearly all of them is staggering. If Dr. Casper is right, then every single site has the makings of a haunted house. All of them could be infested with the spirits of dead, angry D-Class, who are just waiting to wake up and take their revenge on the still living members of the organization that killed them. And it's only a matter of time before they get the chance. Climbers attempting to summit Mount Everest and stand on the top of the world have their work cut out for them. Dangers are everywhere on the long climb. There's a risk of extreme altitude sickness, unpredictable winds, and freezing weather. There's also the threat of avalanches, great unstoppable tidal waves of snow that can bury a person alive in seconds or strand them, leaving them to freeze to death cold and alone. It's a sad reality that not everyone that visits Everest comes back down again, and rarely does a climbing season go by that the mountain doesn't claim yet another victim. Situated on the border between China and Nepal, in a sub-range of the Himalayas of Tibet, Everest is one of the 7 wonders of the natural world. With an elevation of 29,031 feet, or 8,848 meters, Mount Everest has attracted many experienced mountain climbers over the decades. But even for the most experienced mountaineers, the ascension up its snowy slopes is far from easy. Deaths occurring on Mount Everest are nothing new, and hundreds of people are believed to have died attempting to ascend the treacherous peak. Sadly, due to the risks involved with carrying heavy loads down off the mountain, many of those who die on Everest are doomed to stay there forever, their frozen bodies serving up as their own grave markers. It's difficult enough to move your own body up and down Everest, and in many situations, bringing a body back down is simply impossible. The bodies of these lost souls are scattered all across and sometimes underneath the surface of Mount Everest. But some of those bodies are different from the others, and have a special name within the files of the SCP Foundation. They call them SCP-5140. SCP-5140 is the designation given to a number of frozen bodies which are found all across Everest. It is unclear exactly how many instances of SCP-5140 there are, though some estimates have placed the number at somewhere between 1 and 200. At present, it is unknown if all the instances of SCP-5140 are dead bodies belonging to climbers who met tragedy on the tallest mountain in the world, or if some of them are something else entirely. But while their origin is unclear, if you come into contact with a 5140 instance, there won't be any doubt that it's different from the normal body of a dead climber. That's because SCP-5140 corpses are a lot like vampires in some ways. That isn't to say that they actually are vampires. They certainly are not undead and cannot function after death. But much like a vampire traditionally drains blood to survive, These bodies drain heat. SCP-5140 corpses are ectoentropic, meaning they do not adhere to the normal laws of thermodynamics. Whenever these cadavers are exposed to sources of heat, including human body heat, the corpse will instantly drain the source of any and all thermal energy. However, the temperature of these SCP-5140 bodies remains the same, regardless of how much heat they are able to drain, staying at a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Should any living person come into direct contact with one of the SCP-5140 corpses, the body will absorb their natural body heat, bringing their victim's own temperature down to 10 degrees Celsius and causing them to die. And once they have died, their body then becomes a new instance of SCP-5140. As a quick side note, this might feel vaguely reminiscent of another anomaly, which features seemingly inert dead bodies that are hazardous to anyone around them. SCP-3008. This anomaly is a powerful mimetic hazard consisting of a large number of drowned human corpses. These corpses are extremely hazardous to approach at even a considerable distance, as the mimetic hazard inherent to the anomaly causes those affected to recognize the bodies in the water as people they know, particularly from their childhood. Like a siren's call, the victims are lured into the water, believing that the familiar bodies are calling to them. If the victims aren't stopped, quarantined, and given amnestic treatment, they are essentially considered lost. They will walk into the water and be absorbed into the collective, becoming just another body floating in the water. While the Foundation doesn't currently believe that there is any official connection between the two anomalies, the similarities are undeniable and worth taking into consideration. Moving on. At present, it is unclear whether SCP-5140 corpses are caused by some sort of infection or parasite that spreads among the bodies uncovered at Mount Everest. If this is the case, the Foundation has yet to uncover the patient zero, the root cause of these infected bodies. There is also little to determine why a deceased body requires the absorption of heat, as well as how it achieves this and also keeps its own temperature low but not frozen. Given that interacting with an instance of SCP-5140 can be fatal, it does seem that these anomalous properties can be passed through contact and exposure, like a disease or a parasite. But there have been no observed anomalous effects among any living person visiting Mount Everest. There is a possibility that the SCP-5140 corpses have developed some form of posthumous mutation that has come as a result of being killed during an Everest avalanche and buried in the snow, their bodies starved of heat after death. After all, Everest is known for its cold temperatures, occasionally reaching as low as 1 degree Fahrenheit or minus 17 degrees Celsius, not to mention the difference in air pressure at such high altitudes, as well as frequent high-speed freezing cold winds. At the summit of Mount Everest, wind speeds can reach up to 280 kilometers per hour. That is equivalent to 175 miles per hour. And high-speed winds have even been known to catch mountain climbers off guard and send them plummeting to their deaths. Perhaps the combination of these conditions, the freezing temperature, the air pressure, and the winds have triggered some sort of change in a number of the bodies unfortunate enough to never leave the snow-covered slopes of Mount Everest. Either that, or these abandoned corpses left in such extreme cold could be the perfect home. Maybe some form of unknown and so far undetected parasite is capable of inhabiting these frozen bodies, and can spread to other living hosts by draining them of their body heat. Stranger things have certainly happened at the SCP Foundation, and that could possibly explain why anyone interacting with an SCP-5140 corpse meets the same grisly fate. Regardless of what causes these abnormalities, or why the SCP-5140 bodies have only been uncovered at Mount Everest, close contact with the corpses often result in casualties and fatalities. Naturally, this is a cost the SCP Foundation likes to avoid as often as it can. The nasty habit SCP-5140 corpses have of draining a person's body heat makes it impractical to bring them back to a Foundation research facility for testing, as does the fact that they're on the tallest mountain in the world. Instead, MTF Delta-14 have been tasked with keeping these heat-thirsty cadavers contained to Mount Everest. Mobile Task Force Delta-14, also known under the codename Winter Wonderland, is formed of a group of particularly adept mountaineers and experts in understanding and adapting to particularly brutal terrain without drawing attention to themselves. These covert operatives are tasked with periodically climbing Mount Everest and keeping SCP-5140 contained. It is this team's job to locate any new instance of SCP-5140 bodies and bury them in the snow. In doing so, the goal is to prevent any unwitting mountain climbers from stumbling upon one of these bodies and potentially becoming a new instance themselves. Meanwhile, the Foundation is pushing for both Nepal and Tibet to tighten restrictions on climbing permits. But of course, the money that Mount Everest tourism brings to these two countries has likely impeded this. According to the Foundation's file on SCP-5140, an incident occurred during one of Mobile Task Force Delta-14's annual Everest expeditions. Members of MTF Delta-14 had been traversing towards the Everest summit, encountering more and more of the SCP-5140 bodies as they made their way up the mountain. Just as they were instructed to do so, the team buried each of the frozen corpses they came across under a blanket of snow. The Delta-14s noticed, though, that there had been a much higher number of the frosty cadavers on this mission, speculating that perhaps Mount Everest's high winds had blown the snow off of ones they had already buried on previous missions. One of the Delta-14s, a man named Charlie Smith, was in correspondence with his colleagues at their base camp. Charlie reported that one of his fellow Winter Wonderlanders, Patrick, had touched one of the SCP-5140 corpses when the team reached the summit, and that he was now buried according to protocols after becoming an SCP-5140 instance himself. As they began their descent from atop Everest, Charlie sent an urgent communication to base camp, reporting that he'd uncovered 3 more SCP-5140 bodies at an abandoned campsite. Except these 3 instances were different from any he had encountered before. These corpses were somehow still moving. Attempting to hurry down the mountain, Charlie reported that a mass of SCP-5140 corpses were blocking his path and draining another one of his squad mates, Arnold, of his body heat to make him one of them. Arnold had been carrying the team's provisions, including their oxygen reserves, to combat the lack of breathable air at Mount Everest's high altitude. Charlie tried in vain to use his flare gun to clear the path, hoping to distract the now walking cadavers with a heat source, but it had no effect. His final message to base camp warned the rest of Delta-14 to not come to the summit of Everest, with Charlie frantically urging them to not let climbers anywhere near it. His final message simply stated that the mountain is danger. A rescue division of Mobile Task Force Delta-14 arrived just under 2 hours later, tracking Charlie's last known location via a GPS beacon. Strangely, despite the frantic messages from Charlie, there were no signs of any SCP-5140 instances. None of the piles of corpses he had warned them about could be seen above the snow, and certainly none of them were moving. It wasn't long before the rescue team found Charlie, though. He was dead, but not drained of heat or turned into another instance of SCP-5140. No, sadly, after bringing their fallen comrade back to base, an autopsy revealed that Charlie had died likely the same way so many other climbers on Everest had. He had suffered from a lack of oxygen. Further examination of his gear revealed that Charlie's oxygen intake valve had been damaged earlier while the squad had been climbing to the summit of Mount Everest. His teammates Arnold Hillary and Patrick Edmund were also discovered on the mountain, but only Patrick had been turned into an SCP-5140 instance. Arnold had simply died from exposure, just like Charlie. The rescue team concluded that due to lack of adequate oxygen, Charlie Smith had hallucinated the sight of SCP-5140 corpses moving and blocking his path, spending his final moments in terror as the mountain's conditions slowly killed him. The Foundation is still unsure exactly what caused his bodies to become instances of SCP-5140, or even how many of them are on Everest, but a major and troubling development has recently been made. After an increase in global temperature led to a large avalanche that resulted in a large portion of the mountain that had previously been covered in thick snow being exposed, the Foundation sent planes that were equipped with thermal imaging equipment to scan the mountain. What they found was as confusing as it was terrifying. The SCP-5140 corpses aren't just spread across the surface of Mount Everest, they are much of Everest. The mountain itself is just a huge pile of corpses, just waiting to drain the life from anyone who attempts to scale it and turn them into a permanent part of the peak. So if you were planning a trip to the Himalayas, hoping to scratch climb Mount Everest off your bucket list, maybe give it a pass. Otherwise, you might find that the climb is even colder than you were expecting. The thin, pale humanoid anomaly had just found itself in Minecraft, of all places. The all-too familiar wail of emergency alarms rang out through the corridors of the Foundation facility. It had happened again, another containment breach. Of course, the on-site personnel were more than familiar with the protocols for a situation like this. So well versed in what to do during an emergency that it had become second nature. Whether they were research staff evacuating for their own safety, or security teams moving in to recapture the escaped anomaly and get the situation under control, everyone was moving like they had been programmed, muscle memory taking over. The loose anomaly was none other than SCP-096. All Foundation personnel were alerted and reminded not to look directly at the creature. There was just one problem. They couldn't look even if they'd ignored their order to try. Nobody could, because the shy guy was nowhere to be found. Well, nowhere in the real world, at least. This whole situation, bizarre even by Foundation standards, had all started with an experiment involving a member of the disposable D-Class personnel. Yet another dangerous convict serving one of several life sentences, now being used as an expendable human lab rat for the Foundation's often sinister purposes. The experiment in question was an attempt to further test the limitation of SCP-096's abilities. By now, the Foundation had done extensive research into the creature known as the Shy Guy. They knew its particular brand of anomalous qualities were triggered when anyone looked directly at it. Being observed would instantaneously send SCP-096 into an uncontrollable rage state, causing it to pursue its observer until they were no longer standing. SCP-096 was known to be able to travel at speeds so relentless, it was pretty much impossible to stop. One moment it was sobbing and screeching in its cell having just been observed, and minutes later, the wide-jawed, long-limbed monster was standing behind whoever had seen it, making its screaming face the image its victim took to the grave with them. Foundation researchers knew that SCP-096's rage state could be triggered by as little as someone seeing the slightest hint of a creature. Even if the Shy Guy had been captured as a tiny speck in the background of a photograph, it would come after anyone whose eyes so much as glanced over that speck. It also didn't matter how far away the observer was. SCP-096 could not be outrun. It could track down anyone wherever they were in the world. But what if a person who had observed the Shy Guy was no longer in the world? The experiment had taken a lot of trial and error. After all, digitizing a human being and transforming their entire consciousness into code was no easy task. But the Foundation wasn't above breaking more than a few eggs to make an omelet, especially when those eggs were the brains of a few D-Class personnel. Actually, the first test subjects turned out more scrambled or fried. Certainly overdone, given the amount of smoke coming from their ears. But eventually, the research team had perfected the device they dubbed the Neural Harness, a headset that could translate a person's mind into pure digital code. Their consciousness would be extracted from their body, leaving their physical form an empty shell, while a digital copy of them was able to traverse the local on-site computer network. Of course, the Foundation wasn't about to let a digitized D-Class run amok with their systems. So their coding experts wrote a number of specialized parameters into their successful test subject. Now the digital D-Class could be programmed to follow the Foundation's directive. From his perspective, it was like he was floating through cyberspace, towards the system that the Foundation had directed him to. A surveillance camera inside SCP-096's cell that usually remained inactive. But not today. The camera blinked to life as soon as the D-Class's code-based consciousness reached it. And through it, he was able to observe SCP-096 sitting against the far wall of its containment chamber, gently whimpering and walking back and forth. That is, until the creature felt that same familiar sensation of being watched. It stood up, enraged, wailing uncontrollably as the D-Class watched from within the camera. Then, a split second later, SCP-096 appeared to blink out of existence. It hadn't worked. The experiment had failed, and the digital D-Class began to panic. Before the Foundation coders could stop him, he frantically scoured the local network for anything, some kind of escape route back into the real world. Maybe, he thought, if he could get back into his body, it wouldn't count. Technically, his digital self was separate from his physical form, so he might get out of SCP-096's clutches on a technicality. But it was impossible. His body was already burned out by the neural harness. There was no way for the D-Class to transfer himself back. There was only one option left: hide. And as it turned out, someone had forgotten to uninstall a certain building game from a computer in one of the Foundation doctor's offices. The D-Class's digitized mind zapped him into Minecraft. From his point of view, it was like he existed within the game itself. He did a computerized equivalent of breathing a sigh of relief, only to take back all those ones and zeros in a horrified gasp as he noticed a tall, wiry-framed figure before him. It hadn't worked. SCP-096 had still managed to follow him into Minecraft. Even in a world of computer code, the Shy Guy was able to dispatch its digital observer quite easily, and what had once been a living human mind in the form of binary code was quickly deleted. But that's when SCP-096 started to take notice of its surroundings. With the most recent person to see it gone, it had the chance to actually take in where it was. The bright rays of warm light coming down from a cube-shaped sun reveal a welcoming landscape all around, constructed entirely from cubes. It fascinated SCP-096, instilling a kind of childlike wonder in the Shy Guy, the likes of which it hadn't experienced since it couldn't remember when. Rather than leaving, instantly reappearing in its containment chamber, SCP-096 made the conscious decision to start exploring. There was a mountainous biome surrounding SCP-096, stony spires reaching up towards a clear sky, with a waterfall cascading its way down the nearest of them. At the foot of the mountains was the opening of a cave, which the Shy Guy found itself wandering towards. The light from the sun, while a pleasant and welcoming change to the surroundings it was used to, was a little harsh on SCP-096's sunken eyes. So instead, it began to gravitate towards the shadowy confines of the caves, not unlike the usual darkness of its containment chamber back at the Foundation. Traversing through long, winding corridors of stone, SCP-096 found itself having to bend down to avoid hitting its head on the cave's low ceiling. Obviously, this formation of rocky blocks hadn't formed with someone of the Shy Guy's height in mind. There was a low, warm glow coming from the farthest side of the tunnel, and the thin creature made its way closer and closer, despite the stone walls around it feeling like a tighter confinement than its cell. Approaching the source of the light, SCP-096 was relieved that the cave opened out into a more spacious area, the cramped tunnel giving way to an expansive chamber that lay within the heart of the mountain. The warm, orangey glow that had been coming from a flowing stream of boiling hot lava that seemed to trickle down from somewhere above, creating a deadly, fiery pool directly in the Shy Guy's path. But just before it could turn back and leave the cave through the way he came, SCP-096 sensed that familiar feeling of something observing him. Across the lava pool on the other side was a creature comprised of a green cube for a head, with a long, armless cuboid body and 4 cubed feet. If it had been present in the real world, it might have been made out of leaves like a living shrub. It was staring directly at the Shy Guy from across the lava, only for this strange newcomer to disappear a moment later. The creeper hissed before it realized that SCP-096 had leaped up behind it to land a fatal blow. But little did the infamously anxious anomaly realize that the sentient shrub wasn't done. There was a colossal boom that caused SCP-096 to stagger backwards, whimpering at the sudden loud explosion and the pain that had accompanied it. The creeper had blown itself to pieces, but in doing so, had left a lasting injury that caused SCP-096 considerable discomfort as it began limping towards the cave that led out the opposite side of the mountain. Despite its injury, the Shy Guy was still able to move with relative ease, and the further it went, the more it seemed to gradually heal. However, it was as it stepped out once more into the sunlight that the creature realized just how hungry it was. Back in the real world, it hadn't eaten for several hours, and surprisingly, even while accidentally stuck in digitized form, the hunger mechanics of Minecraft were having an effect on SCP-096. The Shy Guy started searching around for anything that could prove to satiate its hunger. There was a grove of trees not far, so SCP-096 lumbered to take a closer look. It couldn't be certain, but it felt there was at least a slim chance that there were apples growing amongst the leaves. But even at the anomaly's own elongated height, it couldn't simply reach up to pick them. However, it was while swiping its arms up at the tree that the Shy Guy swung its fist and knocked at the tree trunk. To the creature's surprise, it was able to chip away at the wood with its hands, punching at the tree until the trunk had been reduced to a collection of wooden blocks that the shy guy was able to collect. And sure enough, some red apples dropped from the leaves above, enough to quell the hunger that SCP-096 was feeling, at least for the time being. Nearby, something was moving through the trees. It was yet to lock eyes on SCP-096, but the second it did, the mob would surely have sealed its own fate. As it moved around, minding its own business, the tall figure overheard the sounds of the shy guy eating, and its attention was drawn to where the creature was standing, enjoying an apple. Sensing that it had been seen, SCP-096 turned and locked eyes with the entity. It was perhaps the only other being in Minecraft that was a similar height and stature to the anomaly itself. In fact, the pair were strikingly similar. Before SCP-096 could carry out its usual method of attack, the Enderman suddenly teleported out of view. But it was too late now. Both it and the shy guy had looked at the other's face. Both had been provoked and were compelled to react in exactly the same way. Just as SCP-096 entered its rage state, the Enderman too opened its mouth and began to shake, making loud, lengthy sounds not dissimilar to the shy guy's own angered screams. But something profoundly strange happened next. SCP-096 and the Enderman kept attempting to pursue one another, appearing in a new location within the Minecraft world, neither one getting close enough to the other. They'd teleport, only for the other to teleport away the moment they saw each other, each trying to catch one another but always staying one step behind. This rapid chase almost became a strange, ongoing sort of teleporting dance between SCP-096 and the Enderman. At first, the shy guy had been compelled to attack the Enderman, like it was with any who looked directly at it. But as they appeared and disappeared from place to place, the creature started to feel an odd kinship with this shadowy fellow. It was so used to being frightened and alone, to its overwhelming feelings of insecurity and self-loathing, that the simplicity of just traversing the open world, with a creature very alike itself in many ways, it had all come as a welcome change. SCP-096 found it therapeutic even, and before long was following the Enderman not out of any intention to do it harm, but just to feel, for a little while, like it had a friend. Just a little bit longer, SCP-096 thought, welcoming the enjoyment it felt playing this game of Minecraft.
When you work for the SCP Foundation, you need to be ready for anything. That's why, as part of the Elite Foundation training regimen, senior researchers and guards are always running tests, even against things that aren't recorded anomalies under the auspices of the Foundation. That's why today, for a real change of pace here at SCP Explained, we're not talking about the SCP Foundation. We're talking about made-up monster stories crowdsourced over the internet. We're seeing how the Foundation might fare against iconic creepypasta monsters and maniacs like Herobrine, Jeff the Killer, the Slenderman, Eyeless Jack, Smile Dog, and many, many more. We've even created all new mobile task forces to take each one down. So could any of them best the Foundation's best and brightest? Let's take a look and find out. And be sure to tell us which is your favorite creepypasta entity down in the comments below. Let's get creepy. Jeff the Killer. First up, we've got everyone's favorite disfigured, knife-wielding, homicidal teenager. Whether it's his terrifying visage or the iconic go-to-sleep catchphrase that's forever carved into your mind, there are probably a lot of people out there who have lost nights of sleep worrying that this pale-faced monster could be crawling through their window. But we know what you're probably wondering. Isn't Jeff just a serial killer? Why would the SCP Foundation use up its time chasing down any old regular human murderer? We'd ask for you to think again. Jeff has displayed feats that clearly mark him as anomalous. Despite suffering debilitating burns to his face and body, he still shows superhuman strength, agility, and durability. He's also able to see without eyelids, suggesting some supernatural element is at play. Victims have also reported him dodging shotgun blasts while stalking prey. So, how would the Foundation catch him? Seeing as Jeff's modus operandi is breaking into the homes of his victims while they sleep, the best method would be staking out a neighborhood where he's been shown to be active, keeping close observations on houses, and even setting up personnel from Mobile Task Force Sigma-9, my name is Jeff, in vacant houses as honey traps. Jeff is undeniably strong, fast, and tough,
but if attacked and surrounded by operatives with superior tactics, he could be subdued without casualties. Then it would just be a matter of transferring him to a standard high-security humanoid containment cell. Speaking of horrifying creatures that come to you in the dead of night, the Rake. This supernatural entity has been around for almost 1,000 years, as far as scattered reports are aware. It's also been reported across 4 continents and a huge number of locations within those continents, though most recently it's been reported in rural New York State and Idaho in the early 2000s. The Rake is an inhuman beast, most often known for its large, frightening eyes and its long, rake-like claws. Not only does the monster feed on human beings, but it also produces a traumatic level of fear in its victims. Thankfully, an entity like this is far more familiar territory for the SCP Foundation. Using their state-of-the-art web crawler software, they could catalog reported sightings as they happen, and use clusters of these sightings to triangulate the location of the Rake and dispatch field agents to perform reconnaissance missions. From there, it would just be a matter of waiting to strike and sending in Mobile Task Force Zeta-13 Rake Steppers, fitted with Dr. Dan's scramble goggles to prevent them from being affected by the seemingly cognito-hazardous effects of viewing the Rake. When the creature is placed in containment and kept in a state of perpetual bright light, it would simply be a matter of applying a Scranton reality anchor to prevent the creature from somehow phasing out of containment. Just make sure you avoid its big, staring eyes in the meantime. Though that won't be a problem with the next creepypasta monster, Eyeless Jack. This stealthy creature has its no eyes on one thing and one thing only: your kidneys. And unless you want to die or spend the rest of your life on a dialysis machine, we recommend you keep your distance from him. He's discreet, devious, and diabolical, and if you wake up in the middle of the night to see him staring down at you, it may be the last time your body is able to filter toxins out of its blood naturally. Thankfully, we have a way to make the Foundation put a stop to his organ harvesting ways. Sometimes to catch a Jack, you need to use a Jack. There's no way to catch Eyeless Jack without delicious live kidney bait, so we'd recommend sending in someone who has kidneys to spare. Dr. Jack Bright. Bright could be the perfect bait without losing his life, luring Eyeless Jack into a decoy house while Mobile Task Force Gamma 391, Hit the Road Jack, prepares to spring their cunning trap and plunge this unpleasant kidney muncher into a humanoid containment cell forever. But our next creepypasta entity doesn't want your kidneys, it wants your life. Smile Dog. Our next entity seems like a harmless little JPEG to the untrained eye. A little freaky, sure, but nothing to lose your mind over. But we know that there's far more to this grinning husky than meets the eye. If some reports are to be believed, this image may even be connected to the devil himself. If you're unlucky enough to see this image in the world, it may already be too late for you. Those who see it, typically as an email attachment from a mysterious address, spend the last week of their life in a hell of the mind before eventually succumbing to a bleak and mysterious death. It's a classic cognito-hazardous image, and the most frightening part is that it's self-propagating, with one of the only ways to even mildly alleviate the effects seeming to be spreading the word by subjecting another person to this nightmare. That's when we bring in Mobile Task Force Row 19 Naughty Dog, an elite group of hardened military programmers handpicked from the CIA's cyber warfare unit. They use their very particular set of skills to design web crawler software that roots out and takes down Smile Dog images across the web, and hopefully, one day find the origin of this whole thing. The next creature, on the other hand, we've given up on finding the origin of that. The Expressionless. This entity kind of looks like a terrifying store window mannequin, except rather than modeling fast fashion, she prefers to swallow cats whole and murder hospital staff. Oh, and she also calls herself God. Isn't she just so quirky? Her primary abilities seem to be extreme strength and large, sharp teeth that will easily rend through human flesh. Thankfully, not anything the SCP Foundation hasn't dealt with countless times before. Seeing as the only recorded incident involving the expressionless took place at a hospital in Los Angeles, that would be the most sensible area to stake out. A detail from the creature's original encounter is also telling. It reacted severely to the doctor's attempts to sedate it, implying that chemical sedation is an effective method of incapacitating the beast. That's why every member of Mobile Task Force Kappa 99 ain't no dummy is a sharpshooter with a tranquilizer rifle capable of putting a hippo to sleep with a single shot. She'll probably feel less like a god in her containment cell, but while this monster is expressionless, the next one has one very notable expression: Mr. Widemouth. Compared to some of our other creepypasta contenders, Mr. Widemouth may not look like much, but that, our dear friends, is exactly what this nasty little malefactor wants you to think. He may look like Gizmo's slightly demented cousin, but his intentions are even more sinister than that of your average gremlin. If you're a kid home on a sick day, Mr. Widemouth might strike up a conversation. After gaining your trust, he'll try to lure you to his special place beyond the trees for some fun. But take it from us, all you'll find out there is your doom. This crafty little creep's small stature and manipulative stealth abilities might pose somewhat of a challenge for the SCP Foundation, but that doesn't mean they can't get him with a little intelligence and elbow grease. Mobile Task Force Alpha 18, the Smile Smashers, will follow reports of children disappearing from their isolated homes under mysterious circumstances. Then, using an extra-strength butterfly net straight from the folks at Foundation R&D, they can chase down and capture the nasty little monster. But that won't be the case for this next demonic offering. No, this creepypasta legend is the one that captures you. No End House. In recent years, there's been a spike in interest in so-called extreme haunted houses. If you're not sure what these places are like, basically picture a CIA black site with the occasional plastic skeleton. It's all waterboarding, stress positions, and car batteries. But even those places are nothing compared to the nightmare of No End House. It's a moving, possibly even sentient spatial anomaly hiding in a haunted house attraction. And if you find yourself inside, best believe you're never going to see the outside ever again. Thankfully, Mobile Task Force Delta 35, McCamey's Bane, are on the case. Around Halloween every year, they use web crawlers to detect chatter around No End House events, so they can swoop in and intercept, preventing hapless thrill seekers from being devoured by the house and providing amnestic treatment for anyone who has too close of a call. Sadly, the Foundation will not be able to provide refunds for those who already paid. Speaking of paying, you'll really pay if you end up in our next creepypasta location of doom. Abandoned by Disney. Mowgli's Kingdom, an abandoned tropical Disney attraction based on the Jungle Book movie, is abandoned for a reason. It's a hotbed for anomalous activity, including freakishly large mutant snakes, reports of ghostly activity, and most prominent of all, a terrifying photo-negative Mickey Mouse that stalks any hapless urban explorers who happen to find their way onto the site. Of course, the Walt Disney Corporation keeps it all hush-hush, and the SCP Foundation is happy to give them a hand on that front. Even if the frightening photo-negative Mickey was removed from the site, it's likely the other may appear and continue haunting the site. And seeing that the site cannot be moved as a whole, the Foundation's best bet is to form a perimeter around the abandoned Disney attraction, preventing anything normal from getting in and anything abnormal from getting out. Mobile Task Force Omega-17, Sons of Shere Khan, are ever vigilant and maintain a strong presence in the surrounding area. But you don't need to go anywhere for this next anomalous terror. If you're a big Nintendo fan, it might be sitting in your house right now. Ben Drowned. This haunted NES cartridge of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask contains the restless spirit of its last owner, a guy named Ben who, well, drowned. If you slot this creepy little gaming experience into your Nintendo Entertainment System, you'll soon find that the soul of Ben is communicating with you directly, telling you about how he died and why his consciousness lingers on, embedded in the code of the game. Thankfully, other than the psychological trauma of experiencing the game, you're unlikely to be actually harmed by playing it. However, Mobile Task Force Beta 51, Gamers Don't Have Rights, are still on the case. They'll try to intercept all cursed copies of the game and administer amnestics to anyone who is unfortunate enough to play it. While it is still undeniably spooky, it does feel like a relief to finally find a safe class anomaly on this list. The same can, sadly, not be said about our next creature, the Goat Man. If you're a fan of camping, then this malicious mimic is going to be your worst nightmare. This monster has existed as a fixture of terror in everything from a number of Native American mythologies to iconic 4chan green text posts. You may be thinking, oh, what's so scary about a goat? But this thing is no goat. Aside from the fact that it's the greatest of all time at getting you to crap your cargo shorts in the woods. First, you'll smell blood in the air, and then feel an odd electrical static, like the feeling all around you right before a lightning strike. Then you'll hear noises, strange noises. Something not quite like a voice, like an animal throat straining to form human words. That's when you might notice your group of friends has one more person than you remembered. And the one thing worse than noticing that is not noticing it. Because if you don't, you may end up as the shape-shifting Goat Man's latest victim. Mobile Task Force Theta 11 Got Your Goat are constantly on the hunt for this one, but its extreme intelligence and ethereal nature make it a nightmare to track. But forget nightmares to track. It's time for Laughing Jack. This candy-striped clown from hell is a really nasty customer. Definitely do not engage unless you've got a Scranton Reality anchor on hand and you've got a backup from members of Mobile Task Force Iota 40. Put Jack in the box. As a former imaginary friend gone rogue, Laughing Jack is a semi-intangible reality warper of considerable power. He targets his victims with sadistic glee, pulling them into his dark carnival to experience all kinds of nasty tortures. Laughing Jack shows no remorse, giggling while committing every evil act you can imagine. You'll probably only find this clown funny if you're already a depraved serial killer, and his sense of humor is likely to utterly break your mind unless you've been given amnestic treatment from the SCP Foundation. This is an anomaly that would probably get along swimmingly with SCP-106 The Old Man. They could chat over a few drinks one evening and share notes on how to cause the maximum pain to their hapless victims. That being said, few people understand maximum pain more than the next horrifying abomination on our roster, the Russian sleep experiment test subjects. As anyone familiar with the work of GRU Division P will tell you, the Soviets performed some pretty horrific occult activities throughout the 20th century. One of the most disturbing of these was the infamous Russian sleep experiment, wherein a group of unfortunate political prisoners were doused on a classified anomalous gas that robbed them of their ability to sleep. A chemical compound that the scientists hope might increase the productivity of their workers and soldiers by eliminating sleep. Instead, over several terrifying days, the chemical and the sleep deprivation that ensued caused the subjects to instead become demonic monsters. While current accounts of the story suggest that all the subjects were killed, we can't say for sure there weren't more out there, or that the experiment hasn't been repeated. As such, Mobile Task Force Omicron 8, Nighty Night, is constantly on the lookout for freakish skeletal men wandering through the woods, never sleeping, outside the dark forests where Siberian gulags used to be based. Better safe than sorry, right? Though of course, you won't feel safe at all if you've spent your childhood watching scary media, like horror movies or eerie SCP YouTube channels, like and subscribe by the way, or scariest of all, a strange little puppet show called Candle Cove. Feel a little chill go down your spine. Oh yes, you remember this show, don't you? You love seeing all those cute little puppets going on swashbuckling pirate journeys on their adorable boat, the Laughing Stock. Though there was always that villain, wasn't there? You think his name was Jawbone, but that's not what you called him. You called him the Skin Taker, because he always had that long cloak made of tanned human skin. You also remember that one episode that was just all the characters screaming. I mean, how could you possibly forget? And most of all, you remember asking your mom about it, and her telling you that you never actually watched a show called Candle Cove. You just sat around watching static for hours on end. Of course, the SCP Foundation keeps close tabs on everything related to this traumatic childhood memory. Broadcasts of the show are seemingly impossible to contain. All the Foundation can really do is track down people who have seen it and provide amnestic treatment. Though trust us, there are things that will make your childhood far worse than just watching Candle Cove. Like running into this next iconic monster, the Slenderman. This terrifying entity is powerful as he is iconic. A shape-shifting, faceless, tentacled nightmare in a three-piece suit who likes to hide in forests and abandoned buildings, either stealing children away or influencing their minds until they become his proxies. Supernatural servants who do anything their inhuman master asks them to. The Slenderman is one of the most powerful monsters in all of Creepypasta, so the Foundation certainly has their hands full with keeping his tentacles under wraps. All that Mobile Task Force Chi-90 Marble Hornets can do is track sightings and keep children out of the woods when the danger of potential Slenderman encounters arises. Getting him actually contained basically seems out of the question. Whew. After all this, we might need to relax. Maybe grabbing a nice sugar-free soda and playing a session of Minecraft might make us feel better. We'll be safe there, right? Well, probably. Unless we encounter Herobrine. The SCP Foundation, funnily enough, is actually no stranger to anomalies trapped in Minecraft. They've got SCP-4335, a welt in the Crucible, to thank for that. But this Minecraft horror story is a little more personal. Herobrine is a mysterious user with the Minecraft default skin, except with one difference: completely white eyes. This mysterious figure invades different Minecraft servers, acting incredibly strange towards the people who created them. What makes this more than just some random troll? Well, according to legends, Herobrine is the manifestation of the dead brother of Minecraft's creator, Notch. Naturally, the Foundation doesn't want people running into ghosts on Minecraft, so they dispatch Mobile Task Force Chi-69, blocked and reported, to quarantine any servers where Herobrine is sighted, and spread misinformation that the crafty little entity had never actually existed in the first place. What is the truth of the situation? It's unclear, and that's exactly how the Foundation likes it. So there we have it, folks. How the SCP Foundation would counteract some of the most infamous creepypasta creeps and creatures out there. Which was your favorite? Did we miss any? And would you like to see any of these expanded into a full video in the future? Let us know down in the comments, if you dare.
What's in a name? Ancient folklore and fairy tales sometimes tell of the importance of names, that they can hold the power to summon or banish. Whether you buy into the superstition or not, you'd be unwise to ignore the power a name can have, especially if you ever dare to venture into SCP-4000. Why? Use your own name too many times in this extra-dimensional forest, and you may find that what walks out isn't you at all. At least once a year, the Foundation leads an expedition into SCP-4000 to explore this Keter-class dimension. But if you go down to those woods today, then you'd better follow the rules. Remember, the Foundation has implemented these guidelines for your own safety, and it's in your best interests to follow them. First and foremost, when referencing anything inside SCP-4000, be it a person, place, or thing, you cannot, under any circumstances, use names or titles. Communication is key when exploring SCP-4000, and making use of specific descriptors will deter any adverse effects on your journey. For example, you may want to refer to the location of SCP-4000 as the woods where you need to speak carefully, an apt description for such a place. Of course, there is a reason the Foundation doesn't provide a handy flashcard of alternative descriptors for any personnel taking part in the annual mission into SCP-4000. Nothing found there can be referred to with any consistent name, so it's perhaps advisable to look over a thesaurus and expand your vocabulary before visiting SCP-4000, as you'll need to come up with a lot of different ways to refer to the people and creatures around you. But don't worry, the Foundation will be able to train you how to properly refer to SCP-4000 in both written and verbal communication. In a similar vein, the second rule states that no personnel member should respond to their own name while in SCP-4000. Naturally, you and your fellow expedition team will not be alone in the forest you find yourselves in. The denizens of SCP-4000 are perpetually mutating creatures, some appearing to be trustworthy while others are hostile. It is for personnel members' own safety that no consistent names or titles are used to refer to each other in conversation. conversation. This has been known to cause personnel returning from SCP-4000 to experience vivid hallucinations, and in some instances has led to the appearances of creatures found in SCP-4000 in our world. Thirdly, when interacting with the life forms residing in SCP-4000, personnel are advised to accept any gifts that they're offered, but are warned to, under no circumstances, consume anything that is given to them while inside the forest. Finally, and above all, do not divulge any name, nickname, codename, alias, or any other personal designation when interacting with any native entities, and disregard any designator that an inhabitant of SCP-4000 attempts to assign to you. Personnel must, however, remain courteous in the presence of any native creature of SCP-4000 and treat these entities with respect and formality. Access to SCP-4000 can only be achieved by performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, a ritual requiring a steady flame in an indoor fireplace fueled by only organic kindling. Personnel are required to combine the powdered bones of one male lion, one male red fox, and a baleen whale, and cast these into the fire with a personal possession holding strong sentimental value to the staff member performing 4000 Halloway. Next, personnel are to add 3 feathers of a bird, such as a raven or crow, and must respond with the correct counterphrases once the fire begins to emit a voice. If these conditions are met and the correct response is given, Foundation personnel will gain access to the entry point of SCP-4000. If any error is made during the course of performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, then under no circumstances should this ritual be repeated. Staff are urged to apologize for any incorrect actions, then refrain from engaging in this procedure in the future. Should Procedure 4000 Halloway be completed successfully, Foundation personnel will find themselves arriving in the access point to SCP-4000, emerging from the mouth of an old well in the center of the forest. Exploration teams sent into SCP-4000 are advised that this dimension does not adhere to the laws of physical space that personnel will be accustomed to. There is a single, confirmed safe route that must be used when traversing the forest of SCP-4000, a dirt path leading in a circuit both beginning and terminating at the entry point. Previous attempts to map the landscape of SCP-4000 all confirm that the only way to safely exit this dimension is to follow the entire length of the path in one direction until eventually returning to the well. You have been warned. Any attempt to travel back to the direction you came in will result in a loss of contact with the rest of the expedition team. As mentioned, SCP-4000 is home to a number of entities, often noted to be undergoing continuous and dramatic changes in form. These physiological mutations appear to occur whenever these creatures are unobserved, making distinguishing between them difficult. When questioned about the exact nature of these changes, the inhabitants of SCP-4000 claim to have no control over them and express distress and dissatisfaction when said changes occur. Guidelines have been put in place by the Foundation regarding the interactions between personnel and creatures found in the forest, and adhering to the rules regarding the use of consistent names and titles remains vitally important. The native creatures appear semi-humanoid and are reported to be highly temperamental. Should any staff member happen to offend one of these natives, they may be subjected to anything from verbal assault to acts of extreme physical violence from the SCP-4000 resident. If any Foundation personnel further question why there are so many rules when visiting SCP-4000, then they need to look no further than the discoveries and fate of Dr. Eugene Japers, who during his initial expedition to SCP-4000 in 2005 encountered a humanoid native entity whose head resembled a rabbit's. As the pair shared a polite conversation, the rabbit-like creature made an inquiry regarding Dr. Japers' name, asking, "How is your name?" Keeping to the rules, Dr. Japers did not divulge any name or other form of title to the creature at this time. However, Japers remained courteous and polite during the interaction. The rabbit responded with the following: "Are you simple? I'm merely asking how your name is. My name has smelt of raspberries lately, I think, or snapdragons perhaps. It's so hard to tell these days, but one makes an effort." In his reply, Dr. Japers made a reference to his own name as having tasted rather tart as of late, before concluding the conversation with the rabbit entity. Upon returning to the SCP-4000 forest 3 years later, Dr. Japers was met with the same creature and once again engaged in conversation with it. After briefly discussing their previous encounter, Dr. Japers was able to turn their exchange towards something the rabbit had mentioned before, about finding it difficult to describe his own name. When asked to clarify this point, the rabbit replied, "I can only assume it's because of how long we've been apart, my name and I, that is. It's a good name, a proud name, I'm fairly sure. By this point though, it's probably decayed from its former grandeur, if it even still exists." After this mention of its relationship with its own name, it should be noted that the rabbit referred to Dr. Japers by the title Fellow Scholar. The third and final encounter between Dr. Japers and this entity came in 2013 after the doctor was sent into SCP-4000 with instructions to conduct a more thorough interview with the subject. It was during their third conversation that the Rabbit Man revealed details of a long-forgotten war between human beings and the residents of SCP-4000. Apparently, these creatures, the Fae, do not originate from the forest in which they now reside, and according to the Rabbit Man's claims, were born in our world. Much as it grieves me to say, we were betrayed, the rabbit explained. We had fought side by side, in the war against that factory. We had done nothing but help them, and what did they do? They destroyed us. They took so many of our lives and all of our names. Some of us fled here when the war was just beginning, but not many. Not many. Still, though, I don't hate them. It has been assumed by some that the Foundation was directly involved in whatever may have wiped out the Fae, causing them to either retreat or be banished to the forest of SCP-4000. An additional assumption has been made that whatever weapons were used on these creatures is directly responsible for their constantly shifting state, rendering them without their own names or identities. Whatever the case may be, it was during their conversation that Dr. Japers, in reference to their second encounter, referred to himself as a fellow scholar to the rabbit in order to coax information from him. However, in doing so, the doctor had unwittingly accepted the title that the native entity had given him. By mistakenly responding to the name fellow scholar, the doctor had broken the rules of interacting with the creatures of SCP-4000, an easy mistake, but a costly one. The doctor would later leave SCP-4000, traversing the safe path back to the well, and Dr. Japers vanished shortly after his exit from SCP-4000. His whereabouts are currently unknown. The Foundation has made several attempts to investigate his untimely disappearance, but to this day, he remains missing, and the fur left on the inside of his expedition gear displayed no strange properties. The single goal, it would seem, of the creatures residing in SCP-4000 is the theft of names. However, this naturally extends far beyond the Dimension's definition of identity theft. Though an unfortunate blunder, Dr. Japers allowed the friendly nature and demeanor of the rabbit entity to trick him into accepting the name Fellow Scholar. By giving Dr. Japers a name, the rabbit was free to steal not only his name, but his very identity. While it is unclear how this transference is achieved by the creatures, it is due to the risk of this that the Foundation employs such strict rules for any research team tasked with traveling to the forest of SCP-4000. Make no mistake, names have more power than we realize, and this is evident in few places more so than SCP-4000, a pocket dimension where ever-changing survivors of a forgotten massacre exist as identities alone. Remember, a name is a powerful thing, whichever side of the well you find yourself on. Your name binds you to who you are, but if your name becomes someone else's, then one else of yours becomes theirs too. Now go check out SCP-106 The Old Man and SCP-049 The Plague Doctor Escapes for more of the Foundation's journeys into the strange and unknown.